Chapter 2183. Wei Wei Bai looked at him blankly, then at the small wound on his finger that could be easily healed with okay tension. It was a small bead of blood that was squeezed out. It was such a serious wound. Did he cut it when he was cutting vegetables? So he was. She looked at the young man's terrifyingly rational and cold face, suddenly becoming so obedient and hesitant. Was he flirting? Using a small wound to attract her attention, then asking her to coax him. Fourth baby might be able to do that. Why was eldest baby doing the same? Was eldest baby so contagious that he was poisoned by fourth baby? Even the way he coaxed her was similar to how obedient he was. Wei Wei Bai looked at him blankly and ignored him. Zero slowly put away his awkward and obedient expression. He remembered fourth baby's memories very clearly. Every time that personality did that, she would feel sorry for him and comfort him. Was he not embarrassed enough? Or was his wound not serious enough? That monster was to blame as well. It was so weak that it could not even cause a bigger wound on his body. Zero silently looked down on the Monster King. Wei Wei Bai felt that if Zero had cat ears, they would be drooping down. Following her silence, a terrifying resentment seemed to be gathering above his head. Wei Wei Bai asked the system, he got a wound from cutting vegetables, yet he feels so wronged. The system hugged the Terror Bozu and finally told the truth. No, he just killed 20,000 monsters and a Monster King, Li Yao said. Wei Wei Bai was speechless. She then remembered that the system said before she went to sleep that Zero was going to deal with the monster tide. She thought that it was just chasing them away, or else how could the base be so peaceful? But the monster tide was completely wiped out. What did that mean? One monster could wipe out half of a less professional mercenary group. No base could fight against a monster tide with a Monster King. There was not a single human base in history that was unscathed after clashing with a Monster King's army. The system said, "That's terrible. I always sympathize with that monster." The blood, flesh, and bones were all scattered. It was scarier than any zombie movie. Wei Wei Bai was speechless. It did sound miserable. Wei Wei Bai said, "I didn't hear anything when I was sleeping." The system said, "There's no sound in the base because the male lead ordered everyone not to make a sound. Whoever makes a sound will end up as a monster. Would you be afraid?" Wei Wei Bai looked at the innocent, weak, pitiful look in front of her. "Not really." The young man. He replied, "Fuck, I'm so scared." The system said, "The Monster King was such a powerful boss, yet he died so miserably. Half of his brain was dug out, and the wound on the male lead's wound was accidentally scratched by the crystal core when he was digging out someone's brain." Wei Wei Bai, why is the target of this plane so terrifyingly powerful? The system fell silent. He didn't know how strong the male lead was in this world. He was so strong that it was unreasonable. It was as if he had appeared out of nowhere. Was he even human? It was a few levels higher than the monster's combat strength. They were not from the same plane at all. He was the world's top monster, and all the elites were dispatched from the monster's nest in the apocalypse. Yet, they were all killed by the male lead's meat grinder in more than an hour. They were not from the same plane at all. Did the system make a mistake when it distributed the missions? Wei Wei Bai didn't get an answer. Instead, she saw that Zero was about to retract his finger. His pretense of being obedient was slowly replaced by a gloomy and terrifying coldness. A huge meat grinder appeared in front of Wei Wei Bai. Zero grabbed her by the collar and threw her in. "Don't coax me, change the dumpling filling." Download the ad, https://m, Sashu. Com button at the bottom to record this chapter. Chapter 2184. Zero was silent as he looked at her calm, disdainful, and cold face. It seemed that she didn't feel anything when he pretended to be that personality. Just as he was about to retract his fingers, another pair of hands suddenly wrapped around them. It was soft and warm contact. Zero's fingers froze. The blood on his fingertips trembled and flowed down. She leaned over from a distance of a finger, and her breath brushed against his fingers. The warm breath seemed to caress him inadvertently. Zero stared at her. His beautiful golden eyes were deep. Wei Wei Bai wasn't as childish as she was with fourth baby. Instead, she frowned and said, "How did you get hurt? Are you cutting vegetables in the kitchen?" After all, she couldn't discuss how miserable the Monster King's death was with him. It was safer to talk about the kitchen. What if he got carried away after killing so many monsters and wanted to chop her into minced meat too? The corners of Zero's lips curled up slightly for a moment before he suppressed it and said softly, "Yes." A faint and soft hum. It wasn't his style at all. Wei Wei Bai pointed at a drawer not far away. "There's a medical box there." Zero didn't look away. The drawer opened automatically, and the medical box passed through a short space and appeared beside Wei Wei Bai. This heaven-defying power made people lazy. He didn't even take the box himself and had to use such extravagant power. Wei Wei Bai opened the box, took out a very small bandage, and stuck it on his fingertip. Her actions weren't very attentive and considerate. But her attitude was a little better. And this little bit made Zero stare at her in a daze for a long time. Then, he pursed his lips slightly and looked away again. Eat something. She needed to eat something after her afternoon nap. Pregnant women couldn't resist hunger. This was the plan that personality made after he came out. It was all right. He didn't have the space to change it even if he wanted to. Wei Wei Bai had eaten one meal, so there would be another. After eating, she, the person in charge of the base who was waiting to die, went out for a walk. Zero didn't say anything and walked out side by side with her. When she arrived at the square, she saw countless monster corpses. Monster corpses were excellent materials for weapons. Some of the monster meat was delicious and contained a lot of energy. The corpse of a huge monster king was piled in the middle. It was like a treasure trove. The resources obtained from this wave of monsters were all sold at the market. Their base was the wealthiest and most powerful base in the apocalypse. Wei Wei Bai was stunned, seemingly in disbelief. What happened? Zero saw her confused yet pleasantly surprised expression, and the corners of his mouth curled up. Then, he suppressed it and calmly said, "When you were taking a nap, these things were a little noisy, so I went out to practice, and then they all died." Wei Wei Bai stood there in a daze for a while, looking at the Monster King. He said to the system, "Has this pretentious prick been holding back the urge to show off for too long?" He had specially brought her here to see it, yet he still had to calmly say such a sentence. Perhaps he was already overjoyed. The system said, "Maybe he just wants to show off to you." After all, after he killed these things, he was really calm. Even if everyone in the base knelt down and worshipped him like a god. The male lead still looked like he was saying, "Get away from me, you bunch of bugs, don't dirty my road." Wei Wei Bai said, actually, he could have pretended a few more times. If he pretended a few more times, there wouldn't be enough monsters left in the apocalypse for him to kill. Download the at https://m/sashu.com button at the bottom to record your reading record. Chapter 2185. Wei Wei Bai restrained the corners of her mouth from rising, but she wanted Zero to see that she was happy. Her face was about to cramp up for a comedy effect. In the end, Wei Wei Bai covered her mouth with her hand and said in a muffled voice, "Very good." This sentence was very good. In fact, she wanted to laugh. But she held it in. But in Zero's ears, the muffled voice seemed to contain uncontrollable happiness. It tickled the tip of his ear. Originally, it was just a cleaning mission, but now it made her happy. Zero's fingertips moved. The power of these hands could not only survive, but also make people happy. It was not that personality who made her happy. It was him. Wei Wei Bai saw that everyone in the base was happy. As the person in charge, she had to do something, so that everyone would not forget her. So she used the radio to announce that there would be a grand bonfire banquet tonight. The banquets now were not the polite banquets of ancient times. Instead, they were more boorish. They lit a big bonfire, roasted meat, drank wine, and danced. The most important thing was that they were lively and full of food and drink. As expected, when this news came out, everyone was overjoyed. Who would not be happy to be able to have a holiday, drink, eat meat, dance, and flirt? Seeing the base members roaring in unison and throwing their hats, Wei Wei Bai took a step back. A hint of happiness finally appeared in her tired eyes. And the young man standing behind her, handsome and exquisite, with a gentle smile on his cold and rational face. Many years later, there were still people who remembered this scene. The powerful guardian of the base. The gentle person in charge of the base. Like the brightest stars in the end of the world, they accompanied each other. Wei Wei Bai was only in charge of making the radio broadcast and giving permission. The rest was done by the people below. When it was 8:00, the dance party began. A huge bonfire burned in the square. Food and supplies from the warehouse came out of the warehouse in carts. The fragrant food was all placed on the table in the square for their own use. Some people played drums, some people played the piano. There was an unlimited supply of alcohol. Thousands of people gathered in several piles. They sang and danced happily. Wei Wei Bai sat on a chair. Their side was the largest group of people. But the strange thing was that there was no one around her except Zero. The rest of the people kept a distance of a few people, not daring to approach. Although everyone was happy, the way they looked at Zero was like they were looking at a god. There was a strong sense of worship and respect. Zero did not notice the gazes of others. He calmly cut some non-greasy barbecued meat. Wei Wei Bai refused to eat monster meat, so he only cut the meat of ordinary poultry. Under his precise control, the thin slices of meat were dipped in the sauce. Wei Wei Bai felt that she could eat her fill tonight. Moreover, as long as the air ball didn't cause a ruckus, she would be fine. Her belly wasn't showing yet. After eating a few slices of meat, Zero put some vegetables on the plate. It was a combination of meat and vegetables. Anyway, she would eat it. This kind of life. Salted fish was great. The system was also silently embroidering the Teru Teru Bozu. It had embroidered 50 of the 100 Teru Bozu per day health points. It was still a day where the salted fish host and the handcraft hobby system would just muddle along and wait to die. Zero looked at the crowd with an unusually cold and distant gaze. It was as if there was a thick wall between them that could not affect him at all. His posture was elegant, and he calmly continued cutting the meat. He thought that it was time to bring her back to rest. Suddenly, his knife paused, and he felt a sharp pain in his chest. This was because the Monster King's power had been completely digested. As expected, in the next second, his body naturally returns to normal. Chapter 2186. His golden pupils had a deeper feeling, and seemed even more clear and serene. The brand new energy made his body more perfect and strong. Those violent energies had all become nourishment for his body. The other two personalities even let out a comfortable sigh at the same time. The current him did not need to kill any monsters. Because those monsters would treat him as the new king and completely submit to him. The world of monsters was simpler than that of humans. The powerful bloodline command would make all monsters submit under the pressure of the genes. His body now had all the aura of that monster king. And he also had a strong hypnotic ability. Zero blinked and suddenly looked at Wei Wei Bai. She lowered her eyes and ate quietly, neither fast nor slow. He could not see what she was thinking. Was she still thinking about that personality? This ability could make her tell the truth and then forget it afterward. Zero slowly cut up some meat slices and placed more easily digestible food on the plate. She could freely take it. The drink was still milk with fruit juice. It was sweet and sour. Wei Wei Bai ate until her eyes narrowed. Delicious, too delicious. If she continued to conquer this plane, she would gain more than 10 kilograms. Her beautiful face was bloated and bloated. Suddenly, a hand gently landed on her thin shoulder, and a cold aura attacked. Bai Weiwei looked up and saw Zero sitting beside her. His eyes were deep and serene. She was in a trance, as if she had fallen into a paradise full of feathers. She heard the angel's questioning voice. "Do you like me?" Weiwei Bai could actually understand who was asking this question. She did not have the slightest awareness of lying. The corners of her eyes rose, her eyes were cold, and the corners of her mouth could not help but curve. It was full of disdain and disgust. "Who gave you the courage to ask such a question, like you? How is that possible?" After saying this, the feathers of heaven seemed to have turned into white snow. It was chilly. Weiwei Bai did not understand what was wrong with her for a moment. Suddenly, he heard a familiar voice. It sounded like the system. The system roared beside her ear, "Wake up, you've been hypnotized. Just a few more questions and you've already told him everything." If this was any other dimension, the target's favorability would be at 99. Weiwei Bai revealed her true colors of disdain. The male lead would immediately strangle this female liar to death. Weiwei Bai suddenly woke up, only to see Ling's deep and cold eyes. "Then is he your favorite person?" For a moment, she didn't understand who he was asking, but out of habit, she nodded. Hurry up and pretend that you were hypnotized. Pretend that you didn't nod your head. It would be best if you could ask her who she fell in love with. She would definitely tell him shyly that she had a crush on him, and then she would naturally use the sweet route to successfully capture Duhua. Weiwei Bai looked at Zero blankly. He looked like he hadn't woken up yet. But Zero didn't say anything and remained silent. Under the backdrop of the huge bonfire, his face hidden in the shadows was as cold as snow. The terrifying silence made people feel incomparably oppressed. Zero closed his eyes, covering his golden eyes. He was struggling violently, uncontrollably. He still only liked the weakest personality. He twisted his fingers. He had the urge to create a cage to lock her up. He would use that kind of prison vine. It was harmless to people, but there was almost no material that could break it. Even a psychic wouldn't be able to escape. Not to mention that she couldn't use her abilities now. The cage had to be big enough. It would be best to build a spatial energy wall on the outer layer. That way, no one could enter and she couldn't come out. How nice. Chapter 2187. His tongue licked his thin lips. "Do you like it? My partner with a complex. The person who made his heart move for the first time, the person who made him feel possessive for the first time." The beauty of the fledgling complex turned into a dark and evil temptation on him. He turned Weiwei Bai into a prisoner in his prison. It was just an innate tie. If the main personality wasn't facing losing control, he wouldn't let him out. After all, how could he hide the dark thoughts he had towards his fledgling complex? When the weak personality was broken and infected, he was the furthest away and the infection was the least. But the possessiveness that grew from the darkness expanded infinitely. The main personality clearly had that kind of thought, but he didn't dare to touch her again. He even pretended to be a weakling to win her weak sympathy. How ridiculous. He laughed until he couldn't sit up. Zero's thin red lips curved into a beautiful smile. If it was him, he wouldn't be as unrestrained as the main personality. If you want something, you will get it by any means, right? You will get it by force, right? It was fine even if she struggled in the end. She was still his even if she was broken. He didn't mind at all. Wei Bai felt that she was blinded by Zero's beautiful smile that was like a rose. This monster. It was completely different from the two personalities in front of her. Everyone was partying. The fast-paced drum and piano, dancing around the fire, and the sound of barbecuing meat. It formed a blurry and noisy background. It made Zero's half-gloomy face in the darkness look like Satan descending to the world, evil and unbelievably perfect. Her ankle was completely numb. If she wasn't wearing pants today, she wouldn't dare to imagine what this guy could do in public. No, wearing pants wasn't safe either. The personality in front of her, even if he was fully dressed, could make people kill each other with just a look. Wei Bai's body stiffened. She struggled for a long time, and a trace of humiliation appeared on her face. Her voice was suppressed, cold and angry. Let go of me, you. She couldn't say anything, and she couldn't scold a vixen. Her persona had collapsed. Zero replied lazily, She dragged out the syllable and sounded sweet. Are you angry? He smiled, and there was a hateful smugness in his smile. He lazily shifted his body and leaned against her. He rested his head on her shoulder and breathed in the fragrance of her hair. His voice was magnetic and hoarse. Be good, don't struggle. The more you struggle, the more excited I feel. He had goosebumps all over. As expected, Wei Bai stopped struggling and looked at him calmly. I think you're sick. Do you need me to fill in the application form for you to become a psychiatrist? Under the dim light of the fire, Zero's grayish-blue hair added a layer of misty beauty. He was not angry or annoyed at what she said. Instead, he couldn't help but laugh. The corners of his eyes curled up slightly, and his voice became gentler. A smile that was as sweet as poison also appeared. Of course I'm sick. You're my illness. You're beyond cure. Just listen to her sweet talk skills. She thought of the adorable fourth baby and then looked at the expressionless eldest baby. Of those two personalities, one was qualified to act coquettishly, while the other was qualified to act rationally. You'll be able to see it the next time you open the bookshelf. If you like. Chapter 2188. But when it came to being a bad man, a scumbag was not qualified. His mouth was not even 1/10 as good as Erwa. Wei Bai smiled coldly. Is that so? Then I wish you the best of luck. Zero's fingers gently caressed her face, drawing her gaze to him. Dewa's clothes were more restrained, and the buttons were tightly buttoned. But when she looked at him, Zero had already unbuttoned the top few buttons casually. This half-hidden and half-exposed neck, the white collarbone under the neckline. These were all fatal seduction methods. Zero's eyes were languid and gorgeous. His thin lips opened slightly. Then you have to work hard. My illness, work hard to let me die. Oh, Wei Bai thought, this kind of man not only wants money but also lives. If he stood outside, the number of men and women who supported him could circle the earth 10 times. In ancient times, he would be a demoness who brought disaster to the country. In modern times, there was no doomsday, but he could make doomsday happen. She silently looked away. She felt that if she continued to look, not only would she have a nosebleed, but she would also have a cerebral hemorrhage. Zero was neither fast nor slow. His fingers wrapped around her hair. His white fingertips were black strands of hair. There was a different kind of beauty. His head leaned on her shoulder. His brownish-red eyes were deep and evil. From afar, he was almost attached to Wei Wei Bai. He was like an evil dragon that had seized all the treasures. When others saw it, they immediately did not dare to look. That scene was too impactful. It was also because of Zero's charming eyes. Once he looked at others, they were so cold that they could not see the bottom. Zero seemed to be bored. He gently touched her face with his fingers. With a satisfied and beautiful smile, he said, "Let's do something else, okay?" Wei Wei Bai was incomparably cold. "No, let go of me." Zero pretended not to hear. He bent down, reached under her armpits and knees, and picked her up easily. To her opinion, he only listened to what he wanted to hear. What he did not want to hear, he automatically filtered. Zero stepped into the cracked space. Wei Wei Bai's eyes were different. The bonfire party was gone. It was her room. She lay on the soft white bed, her long hair draped over the pillow. The young man on his body had long lost his youthful temperament. Instead, it was so sweet and flirtatious that it made one's scalp tingle. He looked at her calm face. There was no excitement in her beautiful and cold eyes. Zero tilted his head. His eyes darkened and his laughter became hoarse. "Why do you hate me so much? I'm clearly much stronger than that little idiot." Wei Wei Bai's eyes flashed with anger. "It's better than you being shameless." These words were too impactful. Ling was stunned for a moment. Then, he said aggrievedly, "You're the only one I've hooked up with. When we first met, you were very nice to me. You even gave me flowers. I didn't take the initiative to throw myself at you. How did you become a pervert?" Wei Wei Bai stopped him from pressing down. Her voice was extremely calm. "This is the first time we're meeting, and you were created by me. It's only right for me to be polite to you." But Zero rested his face on one hand and laid down beside her. He said softly, "But you only want that little idiot. So when you see us appear, it's as if we've snatched his body. You're starting to feel hostile towards us." Wei Wei Bai's eyes narrowed. She did not answer. "Save a button, you'll be able to see it the next time you open the bookshelf. If you like." Chapter 2189. But her attitude was obvious. Zero smiled even more beautifully. "Let me guess. Have you been secretly looking up information on multiple personalities recently? You even focused on how to destroy the other personalities and protect one specific personality." Wei Wei Bai narrowed her eyes. She didn't refute, but she didn't answer either. Zero turned over lazily and lay on the bed next to Wei Wei Bai. His lips were only a few centimeters away from her cheek. The man's voice was so pleasant that it could seduce one's soul. "I'll help you." Wei Wei Bai looked at him suspiciously, but the sarcasm in her eyes was very obvious. Zero was as sweet as an evil poisoned apple. "Really, I'll help you. Let's kill the main personality together and get rid of the personality that only knows how to eat. Then, won't your little angel be left?" Wei Wei Bai, if she didn't know that the little angel was swallowed and couldn't come back, she would have believed him. This guy had the ability to charm people. He could make people believe him willingly. Wei Wei Bai almost succeeded in seducing him. Thank goodness for the emotion blocker. Her voice was still cold. "Oh, then you're still left. Zero immediately held his face with both hands and pretended to be shocked. I love you so much, I'm so considerate of you, and I can even give you supreme happiness. Can't you just like me a little? Speaking of this, his eyes turned red and he murmured sadly. You're so heartless. All I want is a little bit of love and protection. Then, I'll quietly hide in your body and not come out, secretly loving you. Wei Wei Bai felt that she had met a strange actor. Damn, all the personalities. Erwa was probably the most pretentious. Look at how pretentious he was. He had the style of courting death. If it weren't for the fact that she didn't walk the path of a little white flower in this world, she would have appreciated him and become a pair of plastic sisters. The way she looked at him was still as cold as when they first met. It was as if she was looking at an object. She wasn't disgusted by his pretentious attitude at all. Wei Wei Bai said indifferently, do you know what time it is now? Zero, I love your time. Wei Wei Bai was speechless for a moment before she said, pregnant women need time to sleep. Do you know how uncomfortable my body is right now? Do you know my schedule? Do you know what a father needs to do for a pregnant mother? A series of questions. A blank expression appeared on Zero's face. Wei Wei Bai stretched out a finger and pointed it at his head as if she was executing a death sentence. You don't know anything, so why are you making trouble? I need a sensible and virtuous man, not a man who comes out to flirt with bees and butterflies. Zero, his charms seemed to be nothing to her. Zero's self-esteem was hurt. Although he was about to pull himself together and continue the ambiguous atmosphere to achieve his goal. It made this night very beautiful. But in the next second, Wei Wei Bai completely ruined the night. Her face paled. Suddenly, she struggled to crawl to the side of the bed and vomited. He spat out a few mouthfuls of blood. Dewa impulsively ran away. Without anyone to pacify the energy ball, it would explode again. Her body would begin to be tormented again. Zero's beautiful expression, which was like a snake or scorpion, disappeared. His expression changed. Wei Wei. Wei Wei Bai didn't answer. Her face was frighteningly pale. She was suddenly pulled into a familiar yet strange embrace. It was Zero's embrace. He saw that her pink lips were stained with the color of blood. It was frighteningly mournful. / Chapter 2190. She immediately reached out and covered her stomach. The energy inside was frighteningly violent. If she wasn't a psychic, her body would have been torn apart by the energy during her pregnancy. It was already very impressive that she could hold on until now. The corners of Ling's eyes twitched a little, gorgeous and vicious. This child can't be kept. However, Wei Wei Bai felt that the child could still be kept. Otherwise, she would be ruined by Erwa. The way he looked at her just now was determined. If she wasn't pregnant, who knew how she would be tied up by the power of space? What did he do? So, Wei Wei Bai reached out and grabbed his clothes tightly. She said weakly, don't touch my child. He was a very good airball to use. It could increase favorability, avoid bad contact, and let her eat and drink well without having to work. Ling saw her tragic expression and a rare look of confusion appeared on his face. You'll die. Wei Wei Bai weakly squeezed out a gentle smile. It's okay. I can hold on. Fourthwa wanted to get rid of this airball, but he was swallowed by the master. If Erwa tried again, he would probably be swallowed too. Who knew if she would fail her mission if her personality didn't have 100 favorability points was swallowed up? Wei Wei Bai wiped the corners of her mouth with difficulty. Her fingers were covered in blood. She sighed. The child is really lively. Even if she was so badly injured, she just smiled helplessly, full of doting. There was no trace of resentment or anxiety. It was as if to her, this child was the meaning of life. Wasn't this child born when the master was still alive? Although not strictly speaking, it was still his child. However, Ling didn't have any feelings. He even started to feel irritated when he saw Wei Wei Bai like this. There was a hint of mockery in his charming eyes, and there was a flash of anger. He closed his eyes and coldly asked the master for a solution. Then, he stretched out his fingers like playing the piano and calmed the energy in the air. The gentle energy started to affect Wei Wei Bai's body. He comforted her tenderly. He needed to calm down, which was what Zero hated the most. What the primary personality was doing patiently, he was very irritated when he did it. What's the use of this damn child? Although they would definitely be similar to them when they were born, their abilities would definitely be powerful. But what was the use? He was so powerful that he was almost invincible. It didn't matter whether he had an extra helper or an enemy. What was the point of having a child? Although he thought so, he still felt disdainful and aggrieved. He used his beautiful fingers to gently touch her stomach, so that the terrifying and violent energy could be calmed down. He was almost leaning on her shoulder. His eyes were still extremely luxurious, and his posture was languid and gorgeous. However, he was gently comforting her. Wei Wei Bai's physical condition slowly improved. She lowered her eyes, and there was a rare trace of quiet gentleness in her eyes. Zero seemed to notice her silence and looked up at her. Other than the first time they met, he rarely observed her normally. Every time, it was the memories of another personality that allowed him to experience different feelings for her. Especially that little idiot personality. The weakest personality was unable to resist their prying eyes. Therefore, his memories were all seen by the three personalities. This was also the reason why he couldn't escape when he was infected later on. At first, it was because of the good impression of the fledgling complex that he didn't have much resistance. // Chapter 2191. More importantly, when that personality was interacting with her, she gently coaxed him. And they had all seen it. After a long time, they even felt a terrifying sense of immersion. They felt that when she was gentle to that little idiot, she was actually coaxing them. She liked them. This caused the subsequent personality to shatter, and the infection of love had such a huge impact. The seductive charm in Zero's eyes slowly disappeared. And her breathing gradually softened. Zero looked at her defenseless as she fell asleep leaning against him. Pregnant women seemed to prefer to sleep. There was still blood on her lips, and her pink lips had a few more traces of bright color. Zero's fingers were still on her stomach, and he felt the quiet and soft throbbing of life inside. His red watery eyes stared at her for a long time. Finally, he gave up on a certain passionate thought and gently placed her on the pillow. Then, he leaned lazily beside her. "You're really troublesome." His voice was magnetic and low, with an unconscious seduction. The girl who was almost half lying in his arms was quiet. Even when she was sleeping, she didn't cause trouble for others. Zero lazily stretched out his fingers and gently touched her facial features. Her eyes were tightly shut, and her long eyelashes rubbed against his fingertips, giving him a ticklish feeling. Her small and exquisite nose, and her lips that had lost their color but were still beautiful. She usually looked at people with a straight face, but when she smiled, she could make many men fall for her. Zero thought of the other two personalities in his body. Although the main personality was absolutely rational and domineering, he would lose control. The hungry personality was more like a product of instinct, and there was only eating and killing in his mind. He was a more special personality, and the incarnation of desire. To him, malicious seduction and evil bewitchment. They were all instincts, and even things that made him happy. So when he saw her, he couldn't help but want to destroy her calm shell. To pull out her darkest desires. Unfortunately, there was none. She was still so cold to him, watching him dance alone like an outsider. What a failure. Only the personality of little idiot could make her treat him differently. Zero lowered his eyes, and under his long and thick eyelashes, his brown-red eyes were like wine, making people feel slightly tipsy. He smiled. Little troublemaker, be good and don't run. Otherwise, I won't be gentle. Jealousy, evil, and viciousness was his nature. For example, when that little idiot's personality was shattered, he was the happiest person. If he couldn't get it, then no one could. This was how he felt when he saw her for the first time. He only had feelings for her. Not to mention after infection. He had developed paranoid seductive thoughts towards her. Before the infection, he thought it was a wonderful idea to make everyone go crazy for him. But after the infection, all he wanted was for her to go crazy for him. Wei Wei Bai felt like she was sleeping next to a poisonous snake. All night long, she could hear the terrifying hissing sound of the poisonous snake. If it wasn't for the system's reminder, she thought that Erwa was plotting something against her again. When he woke up, he heard noises coming from the kitchen. Ever since Dewa and Erwa were infected, they both had fourth Wa's life skills. How touching. Wei Wei Bai's hair was messy and she had dark circles under her eyes. She went to wash up first. When she came out of the bathroom, she saw a scene that made her dumbfounded. Zero lazily flipped his long hair, looked back at her, and smiled flirtatiously. The white space around the dining table was accentuated by his smile, creating a dazzling brilliance. Chapter 2192. He was sitting at the dining table with one leg resting on the chair. Under that simple and homely apron, he was wearing boxers. Wei Wei Bai was stunned for a while before she suppressed the shock in her heart. She had seen a lot of things and had been blocked so many times. This was a piece of cake for her. After the shock, she returned to normal. Thus, she walked over calmly and pretended not to see it. She sat down calmly to eat. Anyway, she had eaten what Dewa cooked, so it didn't matter to Erwa. Ling placed his leg gently on the table. Then, he leaned lazily on the tablecloth with one hand supporting his cheek. His long hair fell to the side of the table. He smiled and said, "Is it good?" Wei Wei Bai, to be honest, it's much worse than what Dewa cooked. Ling bit his lip and frowned. It made one's heart ache. Is it not good? Wei Wei Bai replied calmly, "No, it's very delicious. Thank you for the breakfast." She was very polite, but she didn't look up. However, Zero's finger landed on her food. She tasted a little of it. His white fingertips had a little more aroma of food. He held it to her lips ambiguously. Ling's thin lips curled into a seductive and beautiful smile. His eyes were rippling and charming. "I'm more delicious." Wei Wei Bai. Then, she suddenly felt nauseous. It wasn't because of Erwa. After all, Erwa was really a feast for the eyes. It was because she had a bad appetite in the morning. Those wild fruits were all gone. Erwa, a restless man, didn't have the concept of making fruit juice. Thus, it was normal for her chest to feel tight and nauseous. Thus, when Ling's finger was about to touch her lips, the temptation reached its peak. Wei Wei Bai stood up, rushed to the bathroom, and threw up. Ling looked at his empty finger and listened to the sound of her vomiting. He stared blankly for a while, dumbfounded. His charm, was it so disgusting? Erwa's glass heart shattered. However, when he thought of Wei Wei Bai's discomfort, he immediately disappeared from the table. When he came to the bathroom, Wei Wei Bai already felt much better. She was washing her face and hands when she looked up and saw Zero. She thought for a moment and immediately said, "This is my personal reason. It's not that you're too disgusting. It has nothing to do with you." This was a double blow. It wasn't enough to deal a blow to him with his attitude, but he was going to deal another blow with his words. Zero's gorgeous smile, her seductive actions, and the ambiguous atmosphere. They were all dead. He felt like he was about to die. She was defeated by Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai wiped her face expressionlessly and said, "The temperature in the room is a bit low. If you don't wear clothes, you'll catch a cold easily." Zero staggered back a step and reached out to support herself against the door. Her sorrowful expression was enough to break anyone's heart. She wished she could give her life to him. However, Wei Wei Bai's stomach was like an empty balloon, and the little angel Siwa, who surrounded her every day, was not around. Dewa and Sanhua were also eyeing covetously. With so many bad things, her charm to Erwa was similar to a blind person's coquettish eyes. She didn't look at Erwa's heartbroken and beautiful expression at all. After wiping her face, her pink and white skin was a little red. However, it couldn't hide the explosive calmness in her eyes. She walked to the door. "Make way, you're blocking the door." Erwa leaned against the door and stretched out his long legs. That posture, that seduction. It was enough to make people unable to control themselves. However, Wei Wei Bai only saw his legs blocking the door. Chapter 2193. Erwa, had he become old and weak? Or did he turn into an ugly freak overnight? He moved aside resentfully and let the scumbag Bai walk out calmly. She picked up the white coat and put it on. "I'm going to work. Don't mess around. Stay in the room obediently, okay?" She was worried about Erwa. One look and one could tell that he was a flirt. He didn't have the reliance and peace of an angel or the old-fashioned rationality and professionalism. After saying that, Wei Wei Bai didn't care about his expression. She opened the door and closed the door. She didn't even say goodbye. Looking at the empty room, Ling suddenly rushed into the bathroom and looked left and right in the mirror. Had he become ugly? It was simply too scary. Did he have pimples or spots? Ling looked at himself for a few minutes and confirmed that he was still beautiful. His skin was so good that there were no flaws. When he smiled at her, she was mesmerized. Could it be that his seduction technique was too revealing? She didn't like to be too exposed. That's right. Ling tore off the apron on his body, revealing his slender and beautiful upper body. The seduction of the apron might not be to her taste. She probably liked the kind that was half exposed and didn't like to be straightforward. Ling nodded thoughtfully and then went to find a black suit jacket and a pink scheming shirt. Then he dressed up seriously and buttoned up the beautiful suit jacket. The top few buttons of the simple but flirtatious pink shirt were torn open, revealing his fair and delicate collarbone. He raised his chin slightly. He didn't like flirtatious women. He could also be cold and aloof. Who wasn't a drama queen? Zero calmly appeared in the square. Her cold and indifferent eyes contained a hint of charm as she glanced at those women. His beautiful thin lips gently curved into a trace of a smile that was not a smile. He seemed to be rational and calm, but his every move was eye-catching and seductive. All of a sudden, everyone was captivated. A few women sat on the ground weakly. Ling smiled coldly. This was a normal reaction. His beauty was irresistible. But his current prey and target was only one person. The rest were all eyesores, and it was boring to seduce them. Second baby was most seriously affected by fourth baby's single-mindedness. Out of everyone, he was the only one who was a playboy. He naturally wanted to be high profile and attract everyone's attention. There was no concept of moral integrity. There was only the instinct to emit hormones everywhere. As a result, after the infection, all his hormones could only be directed at one person. It was single-mindedly influencing all his actions now. Including those who weren't by Weiwei, he looked down on them. Weiwei Bai was filling in the report while paying attention to the progress of the few mutants. A portion of the monsters had already been sold. The base was now filthy rich. Because of the battle with the Monster King, the reputation of their base had spread throughout the apocalyptic world. Without Dawa, Weiwei Bai had to work hard to keep an eye on him. If things got chaotic, it would be troublesome for her to lead a good life. Just as he stopped writing, he heard a system notification. Your second peacock baby is here. He spread his wings and spread his wings all the way, practically turning himself into a doomsday idol. Weiwei Bai paused. As expected, she heard many people screaming and exclaiming. She looked from afar. At the entrance of the laboratory, a slender and perfect figure appeared. It was as if he had come against the light, and he was as handsome as a god. That cold and indifferent face, however, carried a faintly discernible evil energy. Every step she took seemed to radiate a brilliant light in all directions. He set off everyone like a clown duck, a backdrop. Did he change his style? Zero walked in front of Weiwei Bai, stretched out his finger, and casually tugged at his collar. He was just short of putting seduction on his face. His low and hoarse voice, as gorgeous as a cello, made people's ears tingle. Your body is not good. Don't be so tired. Chapter 2194. These words were domineering and gentle. Ever since Erwa appeared, Weiwei Bai felt that she was being challenged every moment. This was the extreme reaction of encountering a super actor. Unfortunately, she was now the flower of the high mountain, the king of facial paralysis, so she could only put on a disgusted expression. Otherwise, she would also pull her collar, and it would be hard to tell who was seducing who. Seeing Weiwei Bai's calm face, Zero stretched out his finger and casually slid it down from her shoulder. That faintly discernible contact. Weiwei Bai immediately stepped back and said to the seduced assistant beside her, "Continue the experiment." The assistants immediately woke up, blushing and looking down. They continued the experiment just now. Behind the reinforced glass wall was a mercenary preparing to be transformed by the supernatural ability. Their base's supernatural ability transformation was already very mature. The experiment was not that painful, so all the mercenaries who wanted power automatically became the test subjects. Zero saw that she was ignoring him. He touched his face and frowned. She didn't like this. Did she really like the little retard? Zero saw that she had lowered her head and was seriously recording the data. Her calm and pale side profile had a fragile and determined beauty. He leaned against the glass wall with his arms crossed, looking so lazy that he did not look serious. Even if he wanted to pretend to be cold, he did it in a particularly outrageous way. Seeing that Weiwei Bai was ignoring him, Zero once again felt that his charm had lost its effect. His beautiful eyes narrowed dangerously, like the eyes of a poisonous snake, cold and strange. Weiwei Bai suddenly saw Zero's finger drawing circles on the glass wall as if he was bored. Then, every time he drew circles, the subject inside would convulse. The instrument would make a sharp sound that indicated that his life was in danger. Weiwei Bai quickly realized that something was wrong. She looked up at him, her eyes cold and warning. Enough, don't mess around. Zero slowly retracted his hand and stared at the anger in her eyes. He smiled and said, "Am I not helping you speed up the progress?" He sped up the experiment for the subject's own good. Of course, if he couldn't endure it and died, it would be because his body was too weak. Looking at Zero's mischievous and vicious little temper, he thought to himself. Wei Wei Bai said helplessly, "What do you want? If you're bored, then go outside and fight monsters. Don't bother me, I'm really not interested in you." This was a blatant slap to the face. He stepped on Zero's charm several times and threw it into the trash can. The system, who was holding the Terra Terra Bozu and munching on a banana, said, "You still need to increase your favorability. The other party is a narcissistic peacock demon, you just need to praise him more." Wei Wei Bai lowered her head calmly. "Don't worry. It's precisely because he's a narcissist that we can't spoil him. We have to attack him. Everyone loves him. I'm the only one who's different from the other flirtatious sluts. It's no wonder he treats me differently." The system said, It was just that he was worried about overstimulating the masochist. The host always had the ability to stimulate the masochist into a super S. This second baby's personality did not seem to be a good person. If it weren't for the fact that Wei Wei Bai was holding an empty balloon in her stomach, she would vomit blood at every turn. Second baby probably would not have been so obedient and not touched her. Wei Wei Bai did not pay much attention to second baby. Instead, she was thinking more about who should she increase her favorability to first. Third baby's favorability was 80 points, and he was simple-minded. However, he did not come out. With second baby's restless personality, it would not be easy to increase his score. If eldest baby was still here, the rate of increase should start to increase. Button, comma. Chapter 2195. After all, although Dowa's state was rational, once he set his heart on someone, he would begin to focus. She counted the time and felt that she should have a miscarriage. Otherwise, the strategy time would basically be compressed to a few months. After thinking for a long time, Wei Wei Bai seemed to accidentally glance at Erwa. She found that this man's eyes were deep, with a trace of greed, and was quietly looking at her. It was like a colorful and terrible poisonous snake, waiting for her to show a flaw and swallow her. Wei Wei Bai immediately touched her stomach, but she still didn't want to have a miscarriage. This guy looked like a master who forced himself on her. Zero's ability was against the heavens, so when the time came, she would have no place to run. Wei Wei Bai really couldn't bring up any enthusiasm for this person with a split personality. So she continued to follow the manual system, eating and waiting to die. Let's take one step at a time. Wei Wei Bai finished the experiment, and after the ability test subjects came out, they all nodded to her to show respect. She politely smiled back. As a result, the atmosphere suddenly dropped, and all the test subjects ran away, trembling. Zero, who had been leaning against the glass, showed a dangerous smile at this moment, and that seductive but twisted eyes made people shudder. He stared at Wei Wei Bai's polite smile that couldn't be put away in time. The girl was a little weak, but her face was very calm, and she had always been serious and expressionless. She was polite to everyone, including them. So it was better to always be expressionless. Why did she have to smile at others? Zero's smile was unusually cold and vicious. He suddenly reached out, lifted her chin, and said slowly, "Don't smile at others in the future, I don't like it." His dislike was accompanied by a terrible desire to destroy. And he wouldn't suppress himself like the main personality. Wei Wei Bai's smile disappeared. She looked at him expressionlessly, and there was no trace of emotion in her cold eyes. Then she stretched out her fingers, little by little, and pushed them away. "Let me remind you, as your creator, I at least deserve a trace of your respect." As she spoke, she indifferently adjusted her sleeves. Then, she threw the experimental data file to the assistant beside her and turned around to leave coldly and arrogantly. Zero's fingers were empty. Her fingertips were almost forcefully breaking it open. Her fingernails were scraping his skin. If it weren't for the fact that his physical body was too strong, his skin would have been torn and he would have bled. Zero slowly retracted his finger. His actions were casual, but at the same time, there was an evil look in his eyes. He placed his finger on his lips and licked it lightly with the tip of his tongue. It was as if it wanted to lick all the traces of her scent into its stomach. Respect. Ling tilted her head slightly and smiled until her eyes were curved. Her eyes were filled with a seductive light. "Ah, what's that?" "I just want you, that's all." Zero's voice was low and deep. It gave off a dark and enchanting charm. Then, he took a step forward and slowly followed after him. It was as if they were chasing after their prey. They were very careful and kept following him. Wei Wei Bai had just walked out of the laboratory when she saw the leader of the mercenary group running towards her. He was fully armed and had a laser cannon in his hand. There were hundreds of mercenaries following behind him. All of them were on high alert. When he saw Wei Wei Bai, the team leader immediately reported, "We've been attacked by more than 10 bases. We're going to guard the door now." Wei Wei Bai frowned. "How are the casualties so far?" Chapter 2196. There are no casualties yet. The other party hasn't launched a large-scale attack yet, but, the team leader blabbered for a while. After hurriedly reporting, he immediately ran to guard the door with his men. Because this doomsday sandstorm was too serious, it caused all the bases to fall into trouble except for their base. Although their base had a very good reputation. But when it came to life and death, those bases couldn't care less. They tried to capture their base as quickly as possible and get the huge amount of supplies in their warehouse. Under the leadership of the largest and most ferocious base, those base mercenaries had already killed their way to a kilometer away. With more than a dozen bases united, the number of people must be in the tens of thousands. Their base only had a few thousand people. And hundreds of them were civilian staff who maintained the base, and 100 or so were from the experimental group. If they gathered together and fought with others, it wouldn't be good for them. Even if it was troublesome to capture them, even if they wanted to live a peaceful life, it wouldn't be peaceful. Wei Wei Bai's expression was still calm, but there was worry in her eyes. She was just about to follow those mercenaries out. A pair of hands gently wrapped around her neck from behind. He pushed her back and bound her in a gentle and strong embrace. Zero smiled brightly, and his brownish-red eyes were full of greed and suppressed emotions. He lowered his head and rubbed her hair innocently and passionately. Like an obedient big cat. "Wei Wei, do you need help?" "I can help you." His coquettishness was completely different from Fourth Baby. It was with a sense of bewitchment. Was it exuding a sense of depravity with bad intentions? Wei Wei Bai stood quietly for a while. The breathing of the man behind her gradually deepened. Finally, her eyelashes trembled, and there was a trace of hesitation in her clear eyes. "What do you want?" If Dewa made a move, she didn't need to worry at all. Because he didn't beat around the bush and would only deal with things rationally. But Erwa was different. Let him do things. If he didn't give something, he definitely wouldn't move. Zero's smile became even happier. His words contained laughter, and there was a trace of twisted excitement. "You have to make me happy." Wei Wei Bai frowned. "Be more specific." "What do you mean by happy?" Ling pursed his thin lips and whispered into her ear, "Just make me smile. After all, I'm not an insensible person. I won't make things difficult for you." Wei Wei Bai seemed to be in a difficult position. This kind of request, she took 2 steps forward and released herself from his arms. Then, she turned around and carefully sized him up for a while before revealing a faint smile. "Is it enough to make you laugh?" Her attitude was easygoing, her smile was pure, and the gentleness under her indifference was so moving. Zero's long eyelashes drooped down, suppressing the greed and twisted emotions in her eyes. He nodded lightly. Wei Wei Bai suddenly took a few steps forward and reached under his arm, touching the sensitive flesh on the side of his sturdy waist. Her fingernails lightly scratched. Like an electric shock, the numbness spread from Zero's back to the top of his head. His pursed lips curled up almost instinctively. Even those bewitching eyes of his also curled up. He was caught off guard by this stroke and was amused. Although he did not laugh out loud, he could not hide his smile. Wei Wei Bai calmly retracted her hand. "All right, you're laughing. Go and help." Ling pursed his lips and held his breath. His eyes were wide open. "You cheated. Wei Wei Bai, as long as you're laughing." Ling. The // Chapter 2197. Seeing her look like she had won, Zero couldn't help but mutter, "But I'm not happy." Wei Wei Bai was silent for a while and showed a disdainful expression. "If you can't do it, then so be it. Maybe this personality of yours doesn't know anything and used all his strength to open the screen." Zero, although he couldn't compare to the main personality, he still had the power of the hungry personality. But he was also very powerful. Zero suddenly pursed his lips and smiled dangerously and charmingly. His fingers were very sticky as he held her hand and rubbed her palm with his fingertips. Then he pulled her and walked out. "It's because of you that I fell for this clumsy psychological trick." On the noisy dusty ground, there were all kinds of aircrafts and chariots on the ground. This time, their base was really in the limelight. They had swallowed too many resources. This caused this group of people who couldn't win against the monsters to actually use their own people. It seemed that benefits were still the most tempting. In the past, how could they be so united? With the temptation of absolute benefits, there was a united bandit behavior. Wei Wei Bai didn't even walk out of the door before the base gate was locked. Zero stood outside the transparent door and raised his hand to his forehead. A shadow fell on his beautiful eyes. There was a hint of gloominess and coldness. The smile on his lips was still lazy and evil. "You're now a burden. Don't come out and cause trouble. I'll treat you to the grand fireworks later." After saying that, Zero disappeared. Wei Wei Bai silently took out a bag of jerky snacks from her pocket and pulled a chair over to eat leisurely. There was a special ability that could cheat a target that was similar to a god. It would be a waste of such a special ability if she didn't use it. So Wei Wei Bai was very calm and even used the communicator. She told the guards outside to not go up and fight and to be cautious. If there was danger, they should retreat. She just let Zero go alone. Wasn't this a stage for him to show off his ability because he was awesome? The system looked at the idle host. He didn't do his job and was so bored that green mold grew on his head. The corners of its mouth twitched and it was about to say something. However, he suddenly remembered that he still had a bag of melon seeds that was about to expire, so he immediately dug it out and ate it. The host and the system, who were eating snacks, both looked like salted fish in a daze. Just like those old employees who had been at the bottom for 20 years, their souls and bodies had been separated by laziness and numbness. They were just short of walking corpses. Ah, what the hell is diligence? It was better to eat snacks. She originally thought that the mercenaries would attack soon. In the end, they dug a trench not far from their base, intending to build a protective wall. It was as if they were also afraid that if they fought to the death, it would take too long. Therefore, they first set up a camp to retreat and rest. Wei Wei Bai finished her jerky and was drinking water. A pair of gentle and nimble arms suddenly reached out from behind and hugged her. Zero lazily rested his head on her shoulder. He opened his thin lips slightly and almost licked her ear as he said, "Ah, I've prepared the fireworks. Come with me to take a look." Wei Wei Bai frowned and turned to look at him. "What did you do?" Zero's eyes were bewitching as he smiled maliciously. "Look," Zero stretched out his finger and flicked it lightly. A transparent ray of light that flashed under the light appeared. His voice was so indifferent, as if he didn't care at all. "I can control people's hearts and energy. Everything in the world is at my fingertips." He was like an emotionless god, without any fluctuations of emotion. Chapter 2198. He was just stating a terrifying fact. What was even more frightening than his calmness was that he was even speaking in a teasing tone. Wei Wei Bai was expressionless, but she stared at his fingertips in a daze. She muttered softly, "What kind of monster have I created?" Zero didn't like to hear this sentence. He was so handsome. How did he look like a monster? Zero narrowed his eyes dangerously and covered her lips with his fingertips. He rubbed against her hair, and his tone became sinister. "Yes, sometimes I feel like a monster too. Do you regret creating me?" The last sentence was regret. His voice was low, but it was cold to the bone. He was asking her, but he didn't give her a chance to answer. Zero's reddish-brown eyes were even colder. "It's a pity that you don't have a chance to regret." He didn't want to hear her answer. Because in this world, anyone could regret seeing him. Only she, their creator, couldn't feel a trace of regret. She felt a little regretful. He wanted to kill someone just thinking about it. Wei Wei Bai couldn't open her mouth. She could only stare at him with her eyes wide open. Zero exchanged glances with her. Her clear eyes reflected his enchanting and beautiful face. After looking at her for a long time, he felt that she was actually very cute. Thus, Zero's gaze slowly changed. It became hot and flirtatious. The corners of his eyes also became brighter. Seeing that there was something wrong with his gaze, Wei Wei Bai immediately retracted her gaze. She was calm and indifferent. Zero seemed to feel that it was a pity and sighed softly. He seemed to like it when she glared at him angrily. Seeing that Wei Wei Bai had calmed down, he smiled and carried her up. He disappeared from the spot. When they reappeared, they were already standing on the rooftop of the tallest building in the base. The sky was gloomy. Thick dark clouds floated in the sky. Below the clouds, the enemy was building a military camp in full swing. Zero put her on the rooftop, stretched out his finger, and gently placed it on her lips. "Listen." Wei Wei Bai looked at him blankly. Zero's mouth curved. Like a gorgeous actor, he stretched out his finger and tapped lightly. The sound of death. Bang! A campsite was suddenly torn apart by some kind of power, causing the space to distort. In the background of the raging fire, God Zero was tall and slender. He had one hand in his pocket, and his eyes were still lazy. "Does it sound good?" His smile was filled with contempt for the weak, but more than that, he was trying to please her. Wei Wei Bai was not in the mood to sympathize with the enemy. After all, she was a crazy female scientist in this plane. God knows how many experimenters had abused him. Therefore, she narrowed her eyes coldly and said, "Yes, it sounds nice." Zero's eyes lit up. He seemed to have done a lot of things. Finally, there was something that she liked. Zero smiled happily and suddenly raised his arms. It was as if he was commanding something. A bunch of transparent threads of power appeared from the newly established camp. Boom, boom, all of them burst into flames. Even the sky seemed to be shaken by this massive power, and the entire space seemed to be shaken by this terrifying power. As it continued to distort, the flames also turned into a vortex. The lives of countless enemies disappeared in an instant. It was like the end of the world. Everyone who was still alive was terrified. Even the enemies who were not dead immediately knelt down and wailed. They were completely scared out of their wits. Wei Wei Bai stared blankly at the miserable situation in the distance, as well as the enemies who were suppressed before they could even fight. Chapter 2199. She felt like she was dreaming. Zero retracted his outstretched arms and bowed elegantly to Wei Wei Bai. "Miss, are you satisfied with what you saw?" Wei Wei Bai saw those dead enemies and a lot of kneeling and begging for mercy. If she said she was not satisfied, she felt like she would be thrown into the burning flames in the next moment. The power of the target of this plane. It was beyond the plane. He should be in the cultivation plane, not abusing ordinary humans in this plane. Wei Wei Bai coughed lightly. Enough. I don't need you anymore. If he continued to do this, the second apocalypse was coming. Zero got a superficial answer, but he was not angry. Instead, he smiled and leaned over. "Is there a reward?" Wei Wei Bai stretched out her finger and flicked his forehead unhurriedly. "You're already so old. Why are you asking for a reward like a child? Go back." This sudden flick definitely wouldn't leave any mark on his forehead. But Zero was stunned for a moment, as if he did not expect her to do this. It was a simple yet extremely relaxing action. It made his heart itch. Zero pursed his lips, and the greed in his eyes could hardly be hidden. He suddenly rushed over, grabbed her waist, and pulled her into his arms. The two of them disappeared on the spot. Before Wei Wei Bai could react, they ran to the Tree of Life. The huge Tree of Life had branches as wide as a bed. She lay on the branch. Zero couldn't wait to say, "This tree is very good. The nourishment of life is very good for your body," so, Dawa also said this. Did Erwa remember to bring her here to relax and pick the fruit of life for her to make juice? In the end, in a trance, she saw Erwa taking off his clothes crazily. Wei Wei Bai, Zero was like a fallen Satan. He sat there, his seductive and blurred eyes burning as if he wanted to eat someone. His beautiful gray-blue hair scattered on his fair skin. It was simply terrible. Even a demon was not as seductive as him. Wei Wei Bai, if she didn't pounce on him and violate her character setting, how could she tolerate this little demon's lawlessness? Zero looked at Wei Wei Bai's pale face and said with a smile, "Here, your body will be much better. I will be very careful. You will be fine." Wei Wei Bai frowned. "Is this all you have in your mind?" Zero looked confused and innocent. "Isn't this the most beautiful thing in the world?" Wei Wei Bai, "Fuck, is this Erwa's head? He probably has excavators, oil tankers and high-speed rail. All kinds of extreme racing cars without a guilty conscience." Zero's tone softened and became more charming. "Just once. I'm so handsome, shouldn't you be flustered by me?" Bai Weiwei shook her head. Zero's eyes suddenly turned dangerous. "Then who do you feel that way towards?" "The main personality. Her child, her children." Wei Wei Bai shook her head without hesitation. But Zero's eyes were still vicious. "Oh, right. That damn little retard." Wei Wei Bai raised her eyes and said coldly, "Don't scold him. He's still a child." Zero dragged his voice. "Child," his words were strange and evil. Wei Wei Bai wanted to get up, but Zero held her shoulders. His voice was like a low moan in the dark night. "Wei Wei, I only have feelings for you now. I only want to seduce you and see you lose control for me." Save button. Chapter 2200. Wei Wei Bai's pink face was blank for a moment. Then, a trace of confusion and hesitation appeared in her clear eyes. Zero's fingers gently touched her face. It was as soft as coaxing a child. When I see you, I want you. Do you have such feelings for me? Wei Wei Bai seemed to want to shake her head, but for some reason, it was as if she was being controlled. She actually nodded. There was a trace of joy in Zero's eyes. But behind this joy, there was a condescending and proud look. It was true that he could control people's hearts. Wei Wei Bai was almost in a daze as he led her away. He asked her to love him, and she even said yes. When the system saw that Wei Wei Bai was about to be controlled, it immediately took out the hammer that was nailed to the small stool and gently knocked on Wei Wei Bai's head. Wei Wei Bai immediately woke up. Fortunately, the system was not blocked. Otherwise, she would be controlled by Zero. Was there really no problem with this kind of ability to conquer the target of this plane? He was insane. It was the standard of a demon of the apocalypse. Zero thought that she was being controlled. He leaned lazily against the tree trunk. His clothes were open and scattered. His white chest, beautiful collarbones, and strong and thin waist were exposed. He seemed to be born to seduce. Come here, Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai looked at him calmly. She couldn't be any calmer. Zero, that enchanting little vixen, had prepared everything. He was just waiting for Wei Wei Bai to pounce on him. In the end, Bai Wei Wei looked at him with an indifferent expression. Zero showed a rare trace of confusion. His fingertips moved. That familiar feeling of controlling people's hearts came again. The system took out the small hammer and continued to hit the host's head. It was afraid that the host would become stupid. So it was gentle and didn't dare to use force. Wei Wei Bai suddenly felt awake again. She looked at Zero expressionlessly. It was as if she was looking at a piece of dead pork. She said calmly, "It's cold, don't catch a cold." Zero struggled with all his might. Wei Wei, come here and throw yourself at me. Wei Wei Bai reached out and picked a wild fruit from the side. She looked at him as if she was watching a show. Then, he indifferently nibbled on the fruit. It was sweet, sour, and delicious. She was very cold, calm, and unmoved as she looked at the sky. It's almost evening. It's time to go back for dinner. Ling twisted his body so much that he looked like a fried dough twist. Unfortunately, the person in front of him was blind. And it was a piece of wood that he couldn't control. Zero did not suspect why his ability was ineffective against Wei Wei Bai. After all, she was his creator, and his abilities were ineffective against her. It was quite normal. But even if it was ineffective, he was still like this. She actually treated wild fruit better than him. Zero's glass heart had been shattered a second time. This time, it could not be mended. They were all crushed into powder. It was all gone after being blown by Wei Wei Bai's unromantic cold wind. He struggled with his eyes wide open. Don't you have any feelings for me? Wei Wei Bai was silent for a while. Then, she reluctantly said, "Oh, you're not bad." These words were full of politeness, and he couldn't be more disgusted. Zero ran his fingers through his hair. His posture was stiff. Meat sent from 1,000 miles away. Why didn't she take a few bites? Besides, he was the best delicacy. Wei Wei Bai reached out and picked a few more fruits. She was used to eating these fruits. They tasted too good. She did not know when the next time would come. Wei Wei Bai decided to get more. She saw Zero's jacket and casually threw it aside. However, after Wei Wei Bai got the jacket, she said indifferently, "Lend me your fruits." After that, she began to pick the fruits. Finally, she hugged the jacket, and the wild fruits inside. 0. He decided that he should take the initiative. So, just as he pounced over with a ferocious expression, Wei Wei Bai suddenly stuffed the jacket into his arms. She pointed at the red fruit under the tree and said, "That's delicious." The tree was so tall. She was about to jump down. Ling's expression changed. He pulled her back and scolded, "What are you doing? Don't jump." Wei Wei Bai raised her eyebrows and smiled. "I'm not that weak." 0 said coldly, "It's just a few fruits. Is it worth it for you to make a move?" After he finished speaking, he appeared under the tree and squatted down like an old farmer, quickly picking the fruits. He plucked and plucked. 0 suddenly realized what he was doing. He was here to lure people. He was not here to be a coolie. But when he looked up, he saw Wei Wei Bai sitting on a tree branch, looking at him with sparkling eyes. There was a slight smile at the corner of his mouth. For a moment, he was silent. Then, he lowered his head and continued to pick the fruit. Since he liked these wild fruits so much, he picked them and cut them up before putting them on himself. He wanted to see if she was tempted. Humph. Crossover system, Adonis, come here, /crossover system, Adonis, come here. Read at https://www.sashu.com//crossover system, Adonis, come here. Crossover system, Adonis, come here. Read at https://sashu.com//crossover system, Adonis, come here. Comma. Chapter 2201. Wei Wei Bai ate a stomach full of fruits and felt that life was coming back to life. Erwa was thinking that if she did not pounce on him, he could pounce on her back. But when he saw her happily squinting her eyes, holding a fruit, her feet hanging between the branches, slowly nibbling on the fruit, 0 was instantly struck by her cuteness. Her eyes were clear and without calculation, her usually serious face also became soft and tender. Between the lush green leaves, the sunlight fell on her hair, as if all the light in the world was on her. 0 was very difficult to seduce. His body was the seduction itself, so he was immune to it. But when he leaned on the tree and looked at her, eating the food he picked without asking for anything, at this moment, he felt warmth. It was far from the satisfaction that desire alone could bring. So was this the warmth brought by the memories that the little idiot had experienced? 0 lowered his eyes and stared at her intently. Suddenly he noticed something, frowned, and looked at the leaves of the tree of life. Petrified. 0 felt something, and his body hungrily absorbed the life force of the tree of life. This was the automatic replenishment of his body after he used his ability. He desperately absorbed from everything that had life force. Half of a tree had been petrified from the inside. It was not obvious from the outside. Wei Wei Bai's expression did not change as she ate, but her eyes flashed with a hint of doubt. Tongzi. Is there something wrong with this tree? The energy was different, so she felt different. Although the ability was temporarily gone. But it did not mean that her feelings would disappear. The system looked into the tree and said, "More than half of its life force has been absorbed, it's almost dead." Wei Wei Bai asked, 0 absorbed? The system said, "Yes, he has a devouring instinct. If he uses his ability, he will absorb everything with life force. There are not many things with life force in the apocalypse. If he destroys wantonly, he will devour other things to maintain his body." Devouring life force was a very scary instinct. Especially in a place like the apocalypse. If 0 did not suppress himself, this plane would probably be over. Wei Wei Bai thought of this too, but before this plane was over, she would probably leave. Therefore, he didn't feel anything. Wei Wei Bai suddenly asked, will he devour human life force? The system replied, yes, but humans are not his first choice because their vitality is too weak. Therefore, humans would be the last choice. Wei Wei Bai, damn, I really created a monster. Zero suppressed her instinct to absorb the tree of life. After all, this tree was still useful. It could nourish Wei Wei Bai's body. But in his body, the hungry personality was clamoring with all its might. Not enough, not enough. Zero smiled coldly and waited until Wei Wei was sent back. He then looked for things with life force to absorb. After all, his hungry personality had started to develop a terrifying possessiveness towards Wei Wei Bai. Even the primary personality reminded him not to let him out. Therefore, he could only satisfy his hunger and suppress the personality to continue sleeping. Seeing that it was about time, Zero tore open the space and stretched out his hand in a flirtatious yet beautiful manner. Good girl, we should go home. Wei Wei Bai raised her head to look at him. She didn't have time to hide the gentleness in her eyes, so she simply gave him a look. It seemed to be flirting with him. But this flirtatious look disappeared in an instant. /crossover system, Prince Charming, come here. Chapter 2202. She got up calmly and walked through his side with steady steps. Then, she put her finger in his palm in a reserved and casual manner. It was soft and warm to the touch. It was like the feeling of trust. It was a very strange feeling. Zero narrowed his eyes and smiled. Suddenly, he lifted her up in his arms. Without hesitation, he walked into the violent space. After she returned, Zero did not try to seduce her. Instead, he saw that she was tired. He just held her fingers and kissed them. Then, he watched her eat and rest. When it was time to sleep at night, Ling even put away his flirtatious appearance and read fairy tales to the air ball in her stomach. It was said that this was prenatal education. Ling was disdainful and cold, but he still read it. Wei Wei Bai's eyes softened from indifference. In the end, she even looked at him with a trace of gentleness. Then, she slowly closed her eyes. Just when Ling thought that she was asleep, he got up and was about to look for food. A hand suddenly reached out from the quilt and gently grabbed the corner of his clothes. Zero paused, a trace of doubt flashed through her beautiful eyes, sparkling like water. Suddenly, a calm but gentle voice came from behind him. I have never regretted creating you. This sentence was light and soft. Like a feather, it fell on the tip of Ling's heart. Ling paused for a long time. After all, the personality that she had always disliked was suddenly treated gently at this moment. To let this personality that was only good at guiding humans to have dark and evil thoughts. He actually felt a sense of unfamiliarity and bewilderment. Ling calmed down the strange emotions in his heart and gently turned back. But he saw that she was already leaning against the pillow. Her thick eyelashes covered her clear eyes and she fell asleep. Ling's mouth twitched. She seduced him. He felt like he was kicked away again. This was even worse than him. He stared at her in silence for a long time. Her face, which was originally beautiful to the point of ominous, unexpectedly became pure white and gentle. I really want to do whatever he wanted to her. But he didn't do anything. Instead, he slowly held her fingers and put them back into the quilt. Then, he lowered his head and kissed her gently on the lips with his flirtatious thin lips. Good night, my princess. Ding, Erwa's favorability is at 65. Then, Zero tidied up her clothes, turned around, and disappeared to find a place to absorb life force. Not long after he left, Wei Wei Bai opened her eyes. She was awake and cold. The system said, the place he went to should be the monster's lair. There are still a few big monsters there, but most importantly, it's a forest and grassland. This was the best place for the apocalypse. It was also the place where life force was the most abundant. And as long as Zero went there, all life would be sucked out of that forest and grassland, turning it into a desert. Wei Wei Bai adjusted her sleeping position. So be it, the apocalypse can't get any worse anyways. Just don't try to take advantage of the humans. Towards Erwa, she treated him coldly and disdainfully. Then, she would occasionally give him some warmth. Just like that, her favorability towards him increased. Wei Wei Bai had just closed her eyes when she suddenly heard a dangerous ding. Sure enough, the side quest came. Ding, please save the world. This mission completely shocked Wei Wei Bai. It was truly shocking. What kind of mission was saving the world? It was fine if the mission didn't come, but if it did, it would force her to commit suicide. Ding. Save the world. Detected that the host's level is too low. Mission error, the main system has assigned a new mission, /download the at https://m, Sashu. Calm. Chapter 2203. Wei Wei Bai finally let out a sigh of relief. There were benefits to being too low in level. For example, she did not have to do such a terrible mission like saving the world. Please destroy all abilities of the dangerous person who is destroying the world. Mission progress, 1/4. All abilities of the fourth personality are destroyed. Wei Wei Bai, she needed a cigarette to calm down, she was going crazy. While she was conquering the enemy, she had to destroy the enemy's godlike abilities. The difficulty of such a mission was no different from saving the world. They were all so difficult that it was almost insane. Directly lighting up a skyscraper monkey and flying in a spiral in the sky was easier than her mission. The side missions continued to be released. This mission is classified as a special difficult mission. Personalities with a favorability of 70 and above will be considered to have completed the mission. You can enter the destruction side mission. Wei Wei Bai raised her eyebrows. The first time a main mission appeared, it would be considered to have been completed as long as the favorability of 70. It was obvious that this side mission was really difficult. The side mission was cold and did not have any intention of acting cute. It was as if this mission was a temporary emergency, so it needed to be done quickly. Side mission failed, the host and the system's soul will be destroyed at the same time. Wei Wei Bai and the system, this was much better than being naked and twisting one's butt or twisting one's neck while dancing. The main system was very clear. If it did not kill Zero, she would die together with the system. After the side mission was released, they did not need to sleep anymore. Wei Wei Bai and the system were silent for a long time. Finally, Wei Wei Bai said, "This mission, is the main system finally unable to bear with me cursing it in my heart every day, so it decided to set a trap to kill me?" The system sighed. "I also bought a few cursed scarecrows, wrote its name, and hammered its little hooks every day, cursing it to be a sissy." The two systems with dark hearts were silent for a long time. So this was the main system's revenge mission. What a petty and vicious little bitch. Of course, he couldn't say that. Who knew where the main system was spying on them? Therefore, Wei Wei Bai smiled and said, "The main system must be handsome, noble, and pure. Everyone will love it, and ghosts will worship it. I wish it was my real father." The system immediately nodded. Speaking of the main system, it's the most awesome existence in the system world. It's my god, my everything. If I could be its little honey, I would faint from excitement. Then Wei Wei Bai and 004 fell silent at the same time. He didn't expect his host, system, to be so thick-skinned. She actually dared to say that she wanted to be his father, sell her body. He really admitted defeat. In the end, Wei Wei Bai silently pulled the blanket over herself. Forget it. We'll think of a plan tomorrow. Let me sleep first today. After saying that, she was very calm and quickly fell asleep. His mental fortitude was too strong. How could he sleep like this? After sighing, the system took out the Tera Tera Bozu again and hastened its pace to embroider the eyes. If his soul was destroyed and he didn't have time to return the handmade doll, he would be fined. Zero looked at everything in front of him coldly. The green life force was all absorbed by him. The large forest, grass, and flowers. They were all petrified and turned into sand. He reached out and licked his finger unhurriedly. His thin lips curled up beautifully as he revealed a satisfied smile. How delicious. Even if he wasn't a hungry personality, this kind of life force replenishment was very comfortable for him. Transmigration system, Adonis, come here. Transmigration system, Adonis, come here, / Transmigration system, Adonis, come here. Transmigration system, Adonis, come here. Download the at https://m, Sashu. com / button at the bottom to record this chapter. You'll be able to see it the next time you open your bookshelf. If you like Transmigration system, Adonis, come here, comma. Chapter 2204. Zero bent down and picked up a large bag of fruits beside him. There were only a few fruits left in this place, so he would take them back for Wei Wei Bai to eat. Then he turned around, stepped into the crack in space, and disappeared in a flash. Everything behind him was a desert. Wei Wei Bai woke up and thought of a plan. A weapon that can nullify zero abilities if the HP is less than 1000. If the favorability was 70, then it would pass. Then Dewa and Sanwa would both pass. Only Erwa was left, with 65 favorability it would be easy to get. The salted fish state was completely driven out by the soul destruction, her and the system's 2 lives depended on her now. 1000 HP was the price she had to pay. If it wasn't enough, then she could only bear the pain and continue to bid. The system flipped through the supermarket. There's a broken divine artifact, it might be on sale, but you'll need to wait. Wei Wei Bai supported her chin with her hand, her eyes rational and calm. We can't resist the main system's punishment. The feeling of her life being in someone else's hands was really uncomfortable. The system was silent for a while, then said, Wei Wei, I'm sorry, I don't have that ability. Wei Wei Bai shook her head, her eyes firm, it's fine, after so many difficulties, this time isn't that difficult. When Erwa's favorability reached 70. She stabbed him with the divine artifact, his ability was destroyed. She went straight home, the main quest and side quest were both completed. The main system still had a conscience, this was the first time it gave in on the main quest. Maybe the main system also knew that attacking 4 personalities at once was really dangerous. Wei Wei Bai understood the plan, and immediately got up in high spirits. She didn't know where Erwa went, but she saw a large pot of beautiful fruits on the table. There was a cup of milk with fruit juice, and a breakfast. The system said, the male lead went to find a place with vitality early on. This was a way to appease the hungry personality. If he found it in advance, he could just go and absorb it if he needed it. Wei Wei Bai nodded, and continued to lay out the plan in her mind. After breakfast, she had just wiped her mouth when a pair of hands lazily appeared behind her and hugged her. Erwa was like a beautiful snake, gently rubbing against her, and said in a sexy and low voice, Did you miss me? Wei Wei Bai said calmly, Thank you. Zero blinked and smiled lazily. What's wrong? Do you suddenly see how good I am? Wei Wei Bai, yes, although the breakfast is not very good, it's still a sign of your good intentions. Erwa immediately puffed up his cheeks. Only your little retard can make delicious food. As soon as he said this, the atmosphere suddenly turned gloomy. Wei Wei Bai lowered her eyes, a trace of sorrow hidden in her eyes. She suddenly asked softly, "Can't he come out?" Zero curled his lips, jealousy making his eyes turn red. He wanted to tell her that the little retard was dead. But when he saw the suppressed sadness in her eyes under her eyelashes, he suddenly felt bored and silently pursed his lips. Zero let go of her and straightened his body, saying coldly, "Who knows? Who knows if he will sleep until he dies?" As soon as he said that, the girl's straight back suddenly relaxed. She muttered to herself, her voice choking, "As long as he's fine, I can wait." Zero's fingers twitched. This was really making him feel frustrated and embarrassed. In the end, he suppressed the urge to make a move on her. Her body was visibly weak, and he couldn't be too impulsive. /save button. Chapter 2205. After all, he wasn't a hungry personality. Zero still had the strength to suppress his dark jealousy and cold possessiveness. This was also the reason why the main personality was relieved to let him out. It was just that it was so difficult to endure. He looked at Wei Wei Bai with dark eyes and couldn't help but stick out the tip of his tongue and lick his lips. He couldn't destroy it. Otherwise, the main personality would suppress him. He had to slowly seduce her, let her sink, let her take the initiative. Let her love him. This way, the main personality that was suppressing and losing control would not be awakened. As a temptation, as long as he slowly invaded her life, sooner or later, she would be hypnotized and seduced by him. Wei Wei Bai regained her calmness, as if she didn't know that the jealous heir while behind her was looking at her with dark and greedy eyes. She went to see the experimental subjects as usual. The experimental subjects were as usual. If everything went well, more than 3 psychics could be produced at once. The strength of the base would increase explosively. Then, she went to see the situation of the captives in the base. Zero followed her lazily. When the captives saw Zero, they all started crying. Some of them were filled with fanaticism, while others were filled with hatred. But without exception, when he walked over, everyone retreated to the side. The vast and mighty crowd opened up a path that seemed to be for the king to walk on. Wei Wei Bai held a folder in her hand and casually recorded the number of people. Seeing this scene, she couldn't help but burst out laughing. Zero turned his head and saw her smiling eyes. Under the sun, her smile was dazzling and charming. He almost couldn't help but bend down and gently touch the smile on her lips. "Why are you so happy?" His voice was hoarse, and there was a moment of amazement in his eyes. "Wei Wei Bai, nothing, I just feel that they treat you like a god." Fear and fanaticism, worship and madness. In the apocalypse, power was the existence that controlled everything. Zero's eyelashes trembled like gorgeous butterfly wings. Red light flowed in his beautiful eyes. He lazily glanced at the group of weak and ignorant people. His thin lips curled up in a cold sneer. "Then, do you also think that you have created a god?" Wei Wei Bai's eyes flashed with confusion. She looked at him, and her gaze was distant. He seemed to be reminiscing about something. Zero didn't like her expression. It was as if she was going to disappear at any moment. What a disgusting illusion. The confusion in Wei Wei Bai's eyes disappeared little by little, and light appeared little by little. Like the morning sun, a smile appeared in her eyes. "No, when I created you, I was very happy." Zero didn't expect this answer. It was simply too impossible. Wasn't she guarded against them coldly? Bai Weiwei's voice was low, and it even sounded a bit fragile. This apocalypse is too lonely. I want to create someone who loves me and stays with me for the rest of my life. What precious words. It was like a glimmer in the dark. Wei Wei Bai smiled helplessly. I was the one who made you have a fledgling complex. I want you to love me. Zero could almost see through the lonely soul in her eyes at a glance. Her body was even trembling slightly. All of Zero's seduction and seduction were no longer effective. There was even a hint of confusion in his tone. But she didn't seem happy about their appearance. Wei Wei Bai calmly interrupted him. You're free, and you don't seem to love me very much. I feel that my selfish thoughts are very childish, so I hope that you can control your own life, and not be controlled by me. / Chapter 2206. After saying that, she stepped back and looked at him deeply. Then she turned around and walked away without hesitation. The system praised, your ability to talk nonsense has not deteriorated at all. Wei Wei Bai said modestly, I don't dare to forget when it comes to eating. Ling stood in place with a confused expression, but a strange joy surged in his heart. He repeated softly, love. She actually loved him. No, it was their love. This thought came abruptly, but it was enough to make him happy. He couldn't help but narrow his eyes, and there was a deep smile in his eyes. So cute. The more he looked at her, the cuter she was. Especially when she told him about the loneliness in her soul with a fragile face. He actually felt excited. It wasn't pity, but the excitement of controlling her weakness. But he knew that she might be joking. After all, she really didn't have any good feelings for him. But even if it was fake, when he heard this, he was still very happy. Ling felt that he might not be able to hold it in for long before his sick possessiveness took hold of her. Ding, Airwa's favorability is at 70. Congratulations host, the main mission has been locked. Please complete the side mission before the attack time is up. This time the mission had been notified in advance that the favorability was complete, and the side mission could be postponed. That was why Wei Wei Bai dared to increase Airwa's favorability. If it was like before, the side mission and the main mission had to be synchronized. Once the main mission was completed, the side mission also had to be completed. Then in this plane, she and the system could only kill themselves. She sighed, acting pitiful, and Airwa's favorability increased. It seems that Airwa is still very sympathetic. She thought that among the 4 personalities, only Airwa was kind and sweet. Perhaps he had been infected by her little cookies and candy cubes. That restless Airwa, who looked like a flirtatious bitch. He actually had some sympathy. She showed a bit of vulnerability to him, and his favorability increased. It was really unexpected. System, sympathy. He silently turned back and looked at Airwa's twisted and dark eyes. Where was the sympathy? He didn't see it. Airwa's eyes were more like eating people. Suddenly, a beeping sound came from the supermarket. It was the sound of the discount notification that he had activated. The system immediately opened it to take a look. The incomplete divine artifact had been discounted. The divine artifact was an ancient heaven-punishing dagger. Small and easy to hide, it was very handy. When the main system tried to retrieve it, it took a lot of effort. It was actually incomplete, with only 1 attack left. Furthermore, the remaining attack wasn't that powerful either. When the main system saw this, it threw the dagger to the system as a reward. In the end, whoever obtained the dagger was unlucky. As long as the system and the host had anything to do with the dagger, they would either fail the mission or die for no apparent reason. In the end, no one dared to take it and it was thrown into the supermarket for recycling. Wasn't the system poor? There was nothing he could do about it. If he was unlucky, so be it. They were all about to die, so what could be worse than having their souls destroyed? Therefore, the system immediately said to the host, that damaged artifact has been discounted. It has 580 HP, and its ability is so awesome that it can definitely destroy the male lead's ability. However, because of the damaged part, it can only be used once. Wei Bai stopped in her tracks and was silent for a long time. Only then did she hold her little heart and let out a painful sound. Buy it. Her HP. Go to hell, main system, beep 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 beep. Slash. Chapter 2207. The divine artifact was very ordinary. It was just a small dagger without any special features. It was bald and had no pattern, but she had bought it for 580 yuan. Wei Bai thought that it was actually quite pretty. If even she thought that it was not pretty, it would be a waste of her life points. She weighed the light dagger and thought hard about how she should stab him. After all, she only had one chance. Should she pretend to hug him and stab him in the kidney? Wei Bai, who was still thinking, suddenly heard the system notification and immediately hid the dagger in her pocket. The space distorted and Zero appeared. He was wearing a light green shirt and black leggings. This outfit was an eyesore. Fortunately, he still had a handsome face to save him. Zero held a pile of folders in his hands and placed them in front of Wei Bai. All the energy resources of more than 10 bases are here. Because in the apocalypse, all the bases were competing in network technology. They were worried that someone would hack into the network and leak important information. Therefore, very important information had to be recorded and kept by hand. After he put down the folders, he sat beside Baiwan lazily and leaned on her. His soft black hair fell on his fair forehead. His beautiful red eyes were still bright and beautiful. They were like the most beautiful rubies, making people want to sink into them. Zero's voice was hoarse and sexy. Recently, my waist and back have been aching. It's been really tiring to run around for the past few days. Wei Bai, should she stab him in the kidney? This position seemed to be just right. Zero thought that she did not understand what he meant. He twisted his waist and frowned slightly. Your skin has become rougher. Wei Bai looked at him from head to toe and could not help but look at his back. Her hands were itching. She was just one step away from completing the mission. Where should she stab him? Zero suddenly looked up lazily. He felt that Wei Bai was looking at him with a little enthusiasm. Was she starting to feel sorry for him? Wei Bai felt that it was not safe to stab him now. After all, Zero was too fast. If only her superpower had recovered. But now, he was holding an empty balloon in his stomach. Her favorability rating seemed to have been completed. This air ball was useless. Wei Bai regained her senses. Why hadn't she thought of this? Now that the air ball was gone, her superpower had recovered. Needless to say, she would have no problem stabbing Zero once. Wei Bai immediately contacted the system. Is there any product that can solve the problem of air balls quickly? The system replied, yes, yes, yes. This is a hot seller in the supermarket. Because it's not that expensive, it's a hot seller. They're even selling it at a 20% discount. It's not expensive at all. Wei Bai heaved a sigh of relief. Her eyes lit up when she heard the discount. Her poor mentality immediately flared up. Buy it quickly. Save as much as you can. The system immediately pressed the purchase button. This thing is a little bad. It has a short shelf life. Use it immediately after you buy it. Don't worry, there are no side effects. Wei Bai also didn't want to waste her HP. That 580 HP made her even more stingy. She replied, yes, yes, yes. The system bought it and gave it to her directly. Wei Wei Bai felt a chill in her body, and her stomach started to hurt. Didn't she say there were no side effects? This pain was too real. Zero looked at Bai Weiwei, watching her in a daze. He pursed his lips unhappily. He didn't care about him at all. Didn't she say, a lonely soul yearning to be loved? It seemed like his soul had been seduced away by some foxy woman, leaving him with an empty shell. The download the at https://m/sashu.com button at the bottom to record this chapter. Chapter 2208. Ling stretched out his finger and was about to turn her face to look at him. He didn't like it when she ignored him. Just as his finger touched her face, he realized that her skin was very cold. Furthermore, there was cold sweat. Ling's finger trembled. His dark and selfish heart actually flashed with an uncontrollable panic. Wei Wei Bai frowned and pushed his finger away. She reached out to cover her stomach and said weakly, I'm fine. Her expression had changed. How could she be fine? After a while, he realized something and his eyes fell on her stomach. Her finger was on it. The back of her hand was trembling so badly that the veins were protruding. It was an extremely uncomfortable feeling. The darkness in Ling's eyes was dispelled by her pain. He didn't even know when he would be captured by the fear of cowardice. Without thinking much, he carried her and disappeared. They came to the medical room. All kinds of equipment were turned on. The memories of the weakest personality surged up. He saw those memories appear bit by bit. He knew how to check and what medicine to use to relieve her pain. He even held her fingers tightly with one hand. It seemed to be a form of comfort. This wasn't something he would do. Ling thought so. However, he saw Wei Wei Bai curled up into a ball. Blood flowed out from her lower body and dripped to the ground from the operating table. The faint sound of blood flowing. It was a shocking sight. Wei Wei Bai's lips trembled. She looked up with sweaty eyes. There's pregnancy medicine. Ling's face darkened. However, he suppressed his voice and tried to be as gentle as possible. In the gentleness, he spoke in his usual lazy tone. You won't die. I'm here. These words were not sweet nothings. It was even rough. However, at this moment, Ling's heart surged with real feelings. With him around, she couldn't die. Wei Wei Bai's fingers held on to him. Her sweaty fingers stuck to his fingers. She smiled weakly. I think, the child is gone. The effects of the supermarket's products were too fast. After saying that, her vision turned black and she fainted. Zero was already holding a syringe and injecting the medicine into her blood vessels. However, no matter how fast he was powerless to reverse the situation. The child was gone. Zero blinked blankly. It was rare for his fox-like shrewd eyes to be so stupid and sluggish. He looked at her lying on the operating table full of blood. His heart was beating so fast that it felt like it was going to explode. Their interlocked fingers were stained with blood. It was their child's blood. A sharp pain suddenly came. The instinctive reactions of his several personalities were thrown into chaos at the same time, and they went berserk in his body. Zero's eyes suddenly changed colors several times before finally settling on red. Zero stretched out his hand and gently nourished her body with his own power, keeping her alive. Then, he quickly gave her a blood transfusion. Everything happened very quickly, very familiarly, and very gently. Actually, when the primary personality was fighting for control of the body, he should have woken him up and let the primary personality deal with it. But for some reason, Zero refused to let go of her hand. This feeling was strange and crazy. It was different from the dark greed he had for her earlier. Instead, he felt heartache for her. Ding, Airwa's favorability is at 75. Just as the blood transfusion was done, Zero was about to deal with the operating table. His expression suddenly changed. It was cold, arrogant, and murderous. What's going on? The primary personality woke up. Slash. Chapter 2209. Zero forced a smile. His deep and hoarse voice had a sense of heaviness to it. The child is gone. He closed his eyes and opened them again. It was a beautiful golden color. The flowing golden color was the familiar and aloof coldness. But when he saw his fingers intertwined with hers, covered in blood, he felt a pang of pain. A ripple appeared in his eyes. After a long silence, Zero slowly lowered his body and touched the bed with his other hand. The filthy blood slowly disappeared. It was his child. He was cleaning up the body of their child. How could it be gone? While Zero was asleep, he had been suppressing his loss of control and was about to explode again. However, when his gaze fell on her pale face, he closed his eyes. He closed his eyes as if he had accepted his fate and calmed down as well. Maybe it was good that it was gone. She could not stand this kind of torment. It was a risky thing to do. At first, he wanted a child because he felt that the child was more important to him. However, later on, she was more important. The existence of the child was more like a bomb. He carefully thought that he could handle it. However, this situation still happened. Fortunately, the adult was fine. Zero suppressed all his negative emotions and began to check her body. It might take some time for his superpower to recover after it was drained. There was nothing wrong with her body. Zero did not know what to feel, but he felt more relaxed. Wei Wei Bai raised a finger in disdain at the so-called no side effects. It was so painful that she almost jumped off the building. Fortunately, it did not hurt anymore and she even slept for a long time. When Wei Wei Bai woke up, she saw a familiar place. It was her own room. A surge of energy came from her body. It was the power of her superpower. She recovered so quickly. The system said, "You're awake. You slept for half a month." Wei Wei Bai said, "Slept for half a month. Didn't you say there were no side effects?" The system said, "It was the male lead who let you sleep and let you recover in your sleep. There are no side effects, but it doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. After all, it would be unreal if it didn't hurt and people would complain." There was a reason why this thing was so popular in the supermarket. There were also hosts who took the path of torturing novels, torturing scum, and so on. He needed this thing to torture people or to frame a vixen. Therefore, if it didn't hurt, it wouldn't be real, and he would be suspected. Wei Wei Bai moved her fingers and the familiar strength returned. She felt that her whole body was full of energy. Just as he was feeling the power of his fingers, she suddenly felt a fluctuation in the air and immediately turned to look. She didn't know when Zero had appeared by her bedside, but there was a hint of confusion in his cold and emotionless eyes. Then he lowered his head slightly, his cold black hair covering his beautiful eyes. He silently came over and tucked her in. His movements were gentle and meticulous. It was as if he was worried that he would disturb her. Wei Wei Bai lowered her eyes and then looked up again, as if she wanted to say something. However, Zero seemed to be worried about something. Suddenly, he reached out and hugged her from behind. His aura became a little more chaotic. "You're fine." He said these three simple words with a solemn tone. Wei Wei Bai moved her lips. She didn't feel sad at all, but but she was suppressed by Zero's serious attitude. She rolled her eyes and wondered if she should cry a few times before she could finish what she started. He seemed to have felt her stiffening at that moment. His fingers gently touched her back. It was unbelievably gentle. Wei Bai suddenly thought of 580. Her eyes narrowed and her hand gently touched Zero's back. Then, she followed his back and touched down. The sides of his waist were soft. Slash. Chapter 22:10. Wei Bai was still thinking about how to stab him, but Ling had already let go of her. Dehua was always more rational than emotional. He was only sad for a while and was more concerned about her body. Her ability was restored, and her body began to improve. The health that was hollowed out by the child was gradually recovering. But the recovery speed was unexpectedly slow. He thought that so much nutrition from the Tree of Life could keep her body in a better state. But after the child was gone, he carefully examined her body and found the energy consumed by the child was surprisingly much. She looked healthy, but it was all an illusion. Even when the child was still there, she should have been in pain. But she didn't groan a word. It was simply a terrifying willpower. Ling thought that she was his creator. Before the child, she was also the best ability user in the base. This kind of strong perseverance was indeed her strength. It was a strength that he didn't like. If she was fragile again, he might have found that the Tree of Life didn't have enough nutrition, and she would have died after giving birth to the child. Ling looked at her with an extremely obscure gaze. Her expression was calm and didn't reveal a trace of sadness. It seemed that she was enduring and didn't want people to see her sadness. Ling had always had a calm attitude. His expression was still indifferent when he softened. His fingers gently stroked her hair and quietly rubbed her neck to check her pulse and heartbeat. After confirming that she was a little healthier, he sighed softly. Wei Bai felt that it was a pity that the good opportunity just now had slipped away. She didn't show any unnecessary emotions. The child was gone, and crying for father and mother was really not her character. She would only silently endure the pain, licking her poor wounds alone in a corner. She told the system about her difficulties. The system told her to find a trash can to vomit. When the host was in character, she could still make people disgusted to a new level. The flash of pain between Wei Bai's eyebrows was still very obvious. Ling stared at her and then silently looked away. He didn't speak, but his eyes were not as cold and calm as before. There was a sense of sadness on his white face that had never been there before. Zero reached out and held her finger. "You've been sleeping for half a month. Get up and eat something," he said softly. In the past half a month, he had used his energy to help her comb her body. He was also using nutrient solutions to keep her alive. In this apocalypse, nutrient fluids were actually very good food. Many people didn't have the means to get fresh food, so they relied on nutrient solutions to survive. However, he knew that Wei Bai did not like liquid nutrition. Zero also felt that it was better to eat nutrient fluids for a long period of time. It will affect the digestive system. Wei Bai didn't have much of a reaction. She continued to eat the food he cooked calmly. Zero sat beside her and poured her juice. Wei Bai picked it up and took a sip. Suddenly, she frowned. Her teeth were sore. Zero reacted almost immediately. She liked wild fruit juice because the sour taste was just right. It could suppress the discomfort of pregnancy. Now that the child was gone, her taste had changed. She couldn't stand juice that was too sour. Zero clenched her fists and snapped her fingers. The juice was gone. It turned into pure milk. Wei Bai looked at the cup and was stunned. Finally, she sighed and said, "Don't worry about me so much. The child is gone, and my body has recovered. I'm not a porcelain doll." After saying that, she drank the milk in one gulp and got up to clean the table. /T. Chapter 22:11. You can search Transmigration System. Prince Charming, you can come to Sashu. Calm in Baidu to find the S. She tidied up the table neatly, not giving Zero a chance to interfere. She changed her clothes. She was no longer wearing loose clothes, but the work clothes that were more suitable for walking around. She then put on a long white coat. Zero looked at her silently, but he did not try to persuade her. He just stood up and walked to her side. He followed her out. The superpowered people had succeeded, 4 of them had come out. The superpowers they controlled were also very special, which was a huge guarantee for the base. Of course, the base's biggest reliance in the apocalypse was Zero. Wei Wei Bai recorded the superpowered people's training with a serious face, but in fact, she was talking to the system about the best time to stab someone. The system said, "It's not suitable for your character to stab someone like that." Wei Wei Bai was surprised. "You're actually worried about my character?" The system said, "I'm just thinking of a reason for you, so that you won't fail when you stab someone." Wei Wei Bai said, "That's right. After all, it's not stabbing someone to death, so there should be a reason. It would not make sense to stab someone for no reason." The system said, "Let me guess. It must be because the male lead made the apocalypse worse, so you want to kill your family for justice, or because you found out that 4th baby is dead and want to take revenge or something." Wei Wei Bai was as calm as the wind. "You're done with the spoilers, so I won't do that." The system was speechless. Zero stood tall and silent beside Wei Wei Bai. Just like her guardian, he was dazzling and powerful. His gaze fell on her face, and found that she was in a daze. Of course, it was only for a moment, and she returned to normal. The child was gone. It was good for her body, but it would affect her mood. This was a very normal situation. Zero pondered, how could he ease the mood of a woman who lost her child? This strange thought made him stunned for a few seconds. This was not a question he would think about. But it was normal to think about this kind of question. The successful appearance of the superpowered people, the expansion of the base, the increase of captives, and the abundance of resources. The civilian team took out the proposal for Wei Wei Bai to take over as the person in charge of the base. The ceremony for the person in charge of a base was usually very simple and crude. After all, the apocalypse wasn't rich in resources, so it was best to save as much as possible. However, once the resources were plentiful, the inauguration ceremony would become more extravagant and complicated. This was because a base with abundant resources represented the strength of the base. The inauguration ceremony was also to announce the reputation of the person in charge of the base. In the apocalypse, only powerful bases would dare to do such a thing. Wei Wei Bai took a look at the mission book and said calmly, "There have been too many things to do recently, taking office." A fair and slender finger pressed down on the folder and interrupted Wei Wei Bai with a calm and steady voice. "How soon can the plan be ready?" Although the base had tacitly agreed that Wei Wei Bai was the person in charge, she did not actually hold a succession ceremony. The clerk immediately said, "It will be ready by tomorrow night." Zero's long eyelashes covered her golden eyes, and her tone was a little more commanding. She tapped the folder with her finger and said, "Do your best." What he meant was that there was no need to be thrifty. The necessary steps could not be missed. The clerk immediately nodded. "Okay, we will do it right away." Zero's eyes were indifferent. Her finger left the folder, but her aura was unconsciously very oppressive. Wei Wei Bai moved her lips as if she wanted to say something. // Chapter 22:12. Ling turned around and leaned against the table with his fingers on the table. His expression that was still cold just now had a little more gentleness. I don't want to wrong you. Wei Bai pursed her lips and a strange emotion flashed in her eyes. In the end, she sighed and said, okay, as you wish. Ling stood up straight and then said in a calm tone, then let's go and pick out clothes. Wei Bai murmured, it's really troublesome. Ling looked at her complaining with her head down and finally got a little more angry. He couldn't help but smile. He still liked her like this. Even if she was throwing a tantrum, it was better than her numb appearance. Ding, Dewa's favorability is at 75. The succession ceremony soon arrived. Wei Bai wore the long-sleeved uniform of the person in charge of the base. It had a beautiful collar and a simple and neat jacket. Her neutral dress was very delicate and neat. Her long hair was tied into a high ponytail and fell behind her. During this period of nourishment, her face had a little more healthy color and her lips were red. Zero's gaze lingered on her lips for 3 seconds, and a satisfied expression appeared on his face. Then he elegantly stretched out his elbow and bowed his head, looking like a flower protector. Wei Bai glanced at him. The person in front of her was wearing a black slim suit. He was elegant and cold, handsome and fickle. Only to her, he was a little more gentle. Under the bright lights, he was like the most dazzling star. Wei Bai hesitated for a moment before reaching out and putting her hand on his elbow and followed him to the red carpet. There were hundreds of people crowded on both sides of the carpet. They were the most important backbone personnel in the base. Everyone applauded happily. At the end of the carpet was a metal chair seat on a high platform. It was like a throne. Wei Bai looked at the throne and said calmly, it's too troublesome. Just announce it directly. Ling's posture was gentle and his tone was light, I've solved all the problems for you. You just need to enjoy it. Wei Bai stopped in her tracks. Her expression was a little gloomy, but she quickly revealed a smile. I still remember how you were when you just broke out of your shell. You are much more mature now. You can even make decisions for yourself. These words were truly heart-rending. However, she said it in an unusually calm tone. It sounded like a joke. Zero didn't seem to understand the reproach in her tone. Instead, he smiled and said, because I need to share your burden. They had already reached their seats. Wei Bai stared at the seat and suddenly looked at him coldly. What if I don't need you to share the burden? Zero stretched out his hand and pressed down on the back of her hand that was on his elbow with his well-defined fingers. He suppressed it, as if he was making a promise. He softened his tone and said, I don't want you to suffer. The environment of the apocalypse was tough for anyone. If he didn't interfere, she would have to rely on him to maintain a base. She would be busy to death. Zero would not let her spend all her time on the base. He wanted her to focus all her energy on him. This kind of impulse and possessiveness had always been there. That was why he quietly and slowly took over her power. The people in the base all saw him as a god. He could even simply deprive her of any responsibility and power so that she wouldn't be so tired. So it was normal for her to suddenly feel insecure. Zero calmly analyzed the pros and cons, but he still couldn't say that he wouldn't help her manage the base. Even if he knew that it would make her feel at ease. He couldn't. After Wei Bai heard his words, her body seemed to stiffen. Chapter 22:13. She seemed to think that he wanted to compete with her for power. In the end, she seemed to accept her fate and said, I like it here. This is the place where I was born and raised. Zero gracefully bent down, held her hand, and pushed her back to her seat. Then like a knight, he slowly and beautifully bent down on one knee. There was a gentle smile in his eyes. This was a gesture of absolute submission. He held her fingers so that everyone could see them. That godlike youth had a straight back. His black hair flowed with the light of the night, and his side profile was stunning. He slowly lowered his head, sincere, but not humble, elegant, but not small. Just like that, he imprinted a kiss on the back of her hand. You are my creator. You are the beautiful existence that I instinctively acknowledge. His voice was soft, revealing his heart for the first time. As if he could see her uneasiness. I will help you protect the place you love, and I can also be your knife. For Zero's powerful unrational main personality, when he said this, it was the most sincere. He wanted to get her. He also wanted to protect her. These two feelings existed at the same time. He didn't want her to doubt him. Wei Wei Bai looked down at him. She blinked and pursed her thin lips. She hesitated, but she slowly nodded in the end. Although she hesitated, there was a trace of trust in her eyes. Zero couldn't help but smile, and his golden eyes became much clearer. Ding, Dewa's favorability is at 80. The succession ceremony was held without a hitch. Especially the scene of Zero submitting to Bai Weiwei, which made everyone at the base notice Bai Weiwei. Because Zero was too dazzling, Weiwei Bai, the person in charge, was overshadowed. But in this ceremony, this dazzling youth was willing to kneel. Everyone knew the importance of Weiwei Bai's position. Weiwei Bai's work was also much smoother. The base had expanded a lot, and most of the monsters had disappeared. Weiwei Bai began to send people to study how to restore the vitality of the land. However, after this research, he discovered a very terrifying thing. During this period of time, all the relatively important remaining forests and grasslands had basically withered. It was as if his life force was being sucked away by something. This made the apocalyptic ecology even worse. Weiwei Bai stared at the data and rubbed the bridge of her nose in confusion. She gently held her fingers with one hand. Zero sat beside her with an indifferent expression. Don't rub it. It's a bad habit. Weiwei Bai loosened her fingers and closed her eyes to rest. Her voice was soft and gentle. Can't the earth recover its vitality? Zero replied calmly, yeah, that's how apocalyptic environments are. Weiwei Bai opened her bright eyes. But my dream is to leave the base, end the apocalypse, and restore humanity to its former life. Zero was calm and indulgent. That's a good idea. If you succeed, everyone will sing your praises. Weiwei Bai smiled. That's my dream. I want to become the god of this apocalypse. After saying that, she mischievously ran her finger across his face. But you're their god. The apocalypse worshipped power crazily. Zero had become the most worshipped person of all apocalyptic humans. Even if he was loyal to her, she still appeared ordinary under his light. However, Zero held onto her slender wrist and leaned forward a little. His voice was a little more hoarse than usual. But you're my god. // Save button at the bottom to record this reading. You'll be able to see it the next time you open the bookshelf. If you like. Chapter 22:14. Weiwei Bai's fingers trembled, and her face turned red. Zero's eyes were cold as he let go of her indifferently, as if the disturbing words just now were not said by him. The days passed unhurriedly. Weiwei Bai did not show any expression, but occasionally observed Zero with complicated emotions. Zero still looked indifferent, but from time to time, he would start to do some little things. To hug her or hold her hand. In the Doomsday base, Zero's prestige was getting stronger and stronger. Most of the base's affairs were handled by him. Unbeknownst to her, her work was getting less and less. In Zero's mind, she did not need to waste energy on things that he could do. He liked the feeling of handling things for her. Bai Weiwei didn't protest. As usual, when it was time to take a holiday, she would take a holiday. When it was time to eat, she would eat and drink. However, she was still very active in the creation of psychics. She heard that a new psychic had appeared. Weiwei Bai pulled Zero and ran over excitedly. Zero saw the excitement on her face. You like them very much. Weiwei Bai nodded without hesitation. Psychics are the strongest weapons for survival in the apocalypse. Zero was extremely calm and did not refute. Because he was the strongest psychic. If she liked this kind of weapon the most, then he should be her favorite. After looking at the psychics, she walked to the experiment hall with Zero. The broken culture tank in the middle of the hall was rebuilt. It was still empty. Weiwei Bai's eyes were filled with nostalgia. At that time, you were born here. Zero looked at the culture tank indifferently and did not say anything. Weiwei Bai opened the culture tank. The liquid inside only reached her ankles. She called Zero over. Do you still remember this place? Zero leaned over and glanced at the culture tank. The smell of the nutrient liquid was a little unknown due to the transparent glass. He was about to go back, but his movements were sluggish. The gas in the culture tank was an extremely strong anesthetic. Moreover, it was a newly developed drug that could anesthetize psychics' nerves. In fact, it didn't have much effect on him. It only slowed down his reaction a little. Then, his body immediately adapted to the drug. The reason why he didn't turn around was because a knife had been stabbed into his back. The incomparably cold blade pierced through his bones and into his flesh. It was only 1 centimeter away from his beating heart. The dagger was still too short. Otherwise, it would have pierced his heart and caused him to be severely injured. As for his creator, her body was almost pressed against his back, and that familiar fragrance lingered around him. Her face was pressed against his shoulder. From afar, it was an exceptionally intimate action. Her voice was still gentle and calm. Zero, the apocalypse does need a deity, but it doesn't need 2 deities. My dream is to unite all of humanity in the apocalypse and become the sole ruler. The dagger in her hand did not tremble at all. I don't need a weapon stronger than me. Zero finally realized something, and the power in his body began to go out of control. That dagger had devoured his power. The violent power was torn apart and disappeared. Zero's eyes turned violent. He crushed the glass tank with his fingers. His voice was still calm, but there was a trace of tension in it. What you want, I can give you. Her calm and cruel voice came from behind him. Unfortunately, I don't need you to give it to me. Also, the Zero I wanted from the beginning was that child. That child has disappeared, so there is no need for you to exist. Zero's thin lips trembled. So she knew. The weak personality had disappeared. He thought that she didn't believe it. Weiwei Bai's voice was gentle and sad. Sleep, my proudest work. Zero slowly closed his eyes. His long hair fell down, almost covering half of his face. Just when Weiwei Bai thought that she had succeeded and made him lose all his power. Under that dark long hair, he suddenly slowly raised the corner of his mouth, which was cold and terrifying. / for the convenience of your next reading, you can click on the save button below to record this reading record. Comma. Chapter 22:15. When Weiwei Bai stabbed the dagger into Zero's body. The notification that the mission completion rate was increasing rang in her ears. She was about to run out of energy. She felt a sense of oppression. After all, she had successfully completed the mission. Furthermore, Zero did not resist. Could it be? She was so successful that he was willing to offer his head just to get a smile from her. Thinking about it this way, she was really a calamity that could cause the downfall of a city. When the mission notification reached 90% completion and the dagger was about to disappear due to the powerful backlash. Paw paw paw. All the wires suddenly exploded. The coiled wires flashed and jumped in the air. The laboratory fell into darkness. Because there was no light source, the windows opened automatically. The gray light of day shone in. The bad feeling in Wei Wei Bai's heart grew stronger. She pulled out the dagger almost a second before she was about to complete the side quest. Then, without hesitation, she turned and ran. The system wanted to ask why she suddenly pulled out the dagger and ran when there was only 1 second left. Wasn't this a waste of effort? But in the next moment, a violent power came from nowhere. It violently tore the space apart. The laboratory became a hell of spatial cracks. There were large and small cracks everywhere in the air. A dark and ominous power was crazily drawn out from those spatial cracks. It rushed into the wound that was caused by the dagger. This power was too terrifying. Just now, if Bai Weiwei hadn't run fast enough, not to mention 1 second, even if it was 0.1 seconds, she would have been torn to pieces. All the equipment in the laboratory exploded. The fire and darkness were at the same time. Zero stood in the same spot. His hair had completely turned silver. The hunger in his third personality was completely forced out. The main personality and second personality were not asleep. But because he had lost too much power, the power of hunger took over. Zero's gray eyes slowly turned. They were cold and cruel like a giant beast. His beautiful and cruel eyes gave off a bone-chilling feeling in the light. The power of space that was torn apart rushed into his body crazily. If he had been absorbing the power of life, his personality might have gradually become like the main personality. When it reached maturity, it would naturally fuse with all of its personalities. Because his temperament was absorbing life force, it was filled with the gentleness of the forest. Naturally, he could become an angelic figure. Just like the weakest character that Wei Wei Bai liked the most. At that time, he would be mature, gentle, strong, and even kind. This was the nature of the earth. That was why the primary persona knew that there was more power in the spatial rift. He refused to move. Because this kind of power would allow them to finally mature. He had completely turned into a demon. Zero stretched out his hand and pulled out the power within the crack, absorbing it into his body. The enormous power was so crazy that it was almost impossible to digest it. He even felt pain, and wounds began to appear on his body. Cracks appeared on his skin and blood gushed out. If they don't fuse in advance, they will become mature. In that case, he would not be able to digest this enormous power and would destroy him. Zero ignored the voice of the main personality urging him to fuse. Instead, he turned around and walked through the flames, stepping on the mess on the ground. He walked out step by step, covered in blood. Before the fusion, he had to find her. More blood gushed out of Zero's body, and wounds began to appear on his face. // Chapter 22:16. The power was about to burst his body. The hungry personality was still smelling something. He suddenly smelled her scent. Wei Wei Bai saw that the one stab did not complete the side mission and immediately ran as far as she could. You said that 588 could absorb all the power in one stab. The system said, it could, but I didn't expect it to be so useless that it would need so much time. Wei Wei Bai used her ability and wanted to jump further away. She had to avoid Zero, who had lost control. How is Zero now? I took away 95% of its power. Did it stop going crazy? It's weak and dying in the lab. If it was really dying, it was not too late to go back and finish it off. This dagger only had a little bit of power left. She did not know if she could stab it again. The system looked at Zero and suddenly shouted, "Behind you, behind you." Wei Wei Bai's eyebrows twitched. Behind me. Just as she finished speaking, a beast-like shadow suddenly pounced on her from behind. It pushed her to the ground. The place where Wei Wei Bai escaped was already a wasteland of yellow sand. She ate a mouthful of sand like a dog eating shit. Her bones were almost crushed. Yellow sand flew all over the sky. In the dust, a thick smell of blood followed the shadows and completely suppressed by Wei Wei, who was about to escape. Wei Wei Bai, of course, would not let herself be captured. It was not a matter of character design. It was just that the current Zero was in his beast form. If she did not wait for him to calm down, it would be difficult for her to communicate with him. The man behind her had a chaotic and heavy breath. His voice, along with the blood on his body, had a kind of crazy and desperate pain. Hungry. Dead. Hungry. This kind of hunger was a hunger that threatened his life. His whole body was filled with unbearable pain. In addition, he had absorbed a huge amount of violent energy from the space, which was killing in his body. The hungry personality was tortured by hunger after his power was taken away. On the other hand, he was tortured by the pain of being too full to digest. Under the double torture, his gray eyes were sharp and dry. Wei Wei Bai sensed that he was trembling in pain. She immediately found a flaw and tore open a space crack, disappearing in place. But before she could run away, the spatial crack suddenly appeared again, and she was violently thrown out. Wei Wei Bai rolled a few times in the sand and hid behind a rock. Her eyes were full of fear. "Why can't I use my power?" the system whispered. "Because the male lead stole a large amount of space energy, he is now the master of the most powerful space energy in this world." Wei Wei Bai said, "Tsk, how can I not know this? I have to pretend to be pitiful, or Zero will tear me apart." After saying that, Wei Wei Bai was even more scared and hid behind the stone. After losing her powers, she was just an ordinary girl. In the base, there were at least various barriers for protection. But now, he had nothing and was thrown into the sand of the apocalypse. Zero seemed to sense her fear. He grinned, but it was not cute at all. There was only a hideous expression on his face. The primary personality urged him to fuse, digest, and recover. And, he couldn't hurt her. Why not? She didn't want them anymore. She wanted to destroy them. Why couldn't he drag her down with him? The hungry personality crazily nurtured a terrifying thought in his heart. After the fusion, the primary personality would be the real mature body. But would the mature him still be the current him? //T. Chapter 22:17. His bloody finger fell heavily on the big rock. His voice became strangely gentle. "Wei Wei, come out and play with me, I'll take you to eat something delicious." So before the fusion, he would eat her first. Then he would really have her. It wasn't the main personality, nor was it the mature entity that had fused. The girl behind the rock was silent, but the sound of her breathing became heavier. Zero narrowed his eyes. His gray eyes were like the greediest and most dangerous poisonous snake. As for his finger, he gently rubbed the stone. The rock began to turn into powder. In the powder, he saw Wei Wei Bai's frightened and pale face. He tilted his head and smiled cutely, but also terrifyingly. Then he easily reached out and grabbed her ankle. He dragged her back as she was about to escape. Wei Wei Bai fiercely stretched out her other leg and kicked his face. "Go away, lunatic." Zero easily reached out and blocked her ankle, and even took the opportunity to completely suppress her. The blood on his body fell on her body. It was like a rose blooming. It was so fragrant that the hungry personality couldn't help but sniff her skin. His eyes were sharp and he was extremely excited. Even Wei Wei Bai was stunned by this scene. This was like a half-starved beast, catching a fresh prey. He would definitely open his mouth and take a few bites. Wei Wei Bai was really scared now. She immediately asked Tong Zi, "He's not really going to eat people, right?" "System, seems like, probably, it seems like it." Wei Wei Bai, then she felt a sharp pain in her arm. Sanhua actually bit her arm, those sharp teeth piercing into her flesh. This pain made Wei Wei Bai suck in a breath of cold air. She almost roared. She was in so much pain that her face was pale. A bunch of thoughts flashed through her mind, but none of them could be realized. She was so miserably tricked by 508, she thought that she could immediately end the invasion of this plane after succeeding. Was this not tricking her? The more she went on, the more accidents there were. What was going on? Could it be that she had really been blacklisted by the main system? Before Wei Wei Bai could figure it out, Ling suddenly paused. His hair turned blue, and his eyes turned red. Erwa came out. Wei Wei Bai was so happy to see Erwa for the first time. No matter how unreliable Erwa was, he shouldn't have bitten her. Zero's charming eyes were filled with a hint of dark cruelty. Be it the primary personality or him, there was no way they would allow the hungry personality to monopolize her. Therefore, the primary personality gave up on the idea of fusing with him first. Instead, it released him and started to dissolve the hungry personality. He unhurriedly used his fingers to pinch her wound. Seeing how she was enduring the pain, he sneered. It turns out that my Wei Wei is so ambitious. She wants to be a god." He lowered his head and spoke in a voice that made people tremble in fear. "How pitiful. You always can't recognize how weak you are. Arrogance and stupidity have covered your eyes. You can't even escape from my pursuit." After the pain subsided, Wei Wei Bai managed to keep a clear head. Her eyes were clear and sober. "The winner takes all. Kill me if you want." Ling was stunned. Then, he couldn't help but laugh. "How can I bear to kill you? If you can't be a god, you can change your profession." His fingers slowly tore open her wound. Her clothes were stuck to it. His fingertips were ambiguous but unusually cold. His blood mixed with hers. It was incomparably beautiful. "You can try being a god's slave." / Chapter 22:18. This sentence made Wei Wei Bai's pupils dilate, and she began to struggle as if her hair was standing on end. "Go away, let me go." But it was too late. Betrayal was born with pain and despair. The children who were betrayed by their creator used their own pain to bite back at the one who maintained their fledgling complex. Yellow sand danced in the air. In the dim yellow world, there seemed to be the sound of tearing and struggling. The smell of blood was very obvious, but it was more of a kind of absolute oppression and torture of the strong to the weak. The system looked at the bullet screen that filled the sky, and at first, it was confused. Then it was terrified. Damn, did the host get eaten alive by Sanhua? As a result, the scene was too brutal to watch. No, wasn't Erwa released by the primary personality to suppress Sanhua? Erwa, bullet screen. Thinking about it, it was even more brutal. When Wei Wei Bai opened her eyes, she saw a blurry black shadow in front of her. In the dim light, on the chair not far away, the slender and perfect figure seemed to be in another world. Golden hair fell on the chair, and the exquisite eyes that were more stunning than the sun had a hint of lethargy and indifference. The faint light on his body was like a pair of gray wings. Wei Wei Bai blinked, and suddenly thought of something, and a sharp sense of disgust appeared in her eyes. Her breathing quickened, but she still suppressed it. But soon she saw that the place she was lying on was not right. The soft carpet was as soft as feathers. Green vines spread from the door to behind her. She recognized it, it was the prison vine. The vines were terrifyingly fresh and green. The healthier and fresher the vines were, the more powerful they were. Wei Wei Bai clenched her fist, and finally cried, "Tongzi, the prison vine is here." The system said earnestly, "You're used to it, it's just a refresher." Wei Wei Bai said, "I think it's not just imprisonment, there are many things that can't be said and don't dare to ask will happen." The system said, "Do you want to buy a substitute sticker for you?" Wei Wei Bai said, "Is there a discount?" The system replied, "No." Wei Wei Bai, "Forget it then." Wei Wei Bai said, "By the way, remember to complain to the supermarket. Just say that they sold me fake items and that the dagger didn't work." The system replied, I did. After stabbing him once, he ended up stabbing a blackened hornet's nest. It stung her until her head was full of bumps. Wei Wei Bai did not want to recall the scene in the yellow sand at all. Second baby's sudden attack and terrifying torture were in line with his character. But just as she was about to collapse, his movements became gentler. When she opened her eyes, Dewa had returned. Not waiting for her to think about how to use Dewa's rational character to have a normal communication. What the deranged main personality did next was exactly the same as his shameless second personality who destroyed his 3 viewpoints. Thinking back to when he first came here. When Dewa had just a little bit of affection for her, she took the initiative to throw herself at him. He was so young and pure. Until now, Wei Wei Bai thought, what schizophrenia? What multiple personalities? They were all lies. It was all a lie. Their personalities were all worse than beasts. Except for her 4th baby. After Wei Wei Bai finished lamenting, she saw a pair of feet already in front of her. She was lying on the thick carpet. Her body had lost all strength, and she could barely open her eyes and turn her head to look at him. It was still Zero's face, but it was more mature and had grown a lot. In the delicacy, there was a sense of oppression. Seeing that Wei Wei Bai had woken up, his thick eyelashes drooped, and his tired eyes finally brightened up a little. He sat down slowly and reached out to touch her face gently. You're awake. His voice was even more pleasant, like a sigh, but also like some kind of beautiful music. Do you want anything? Wei Wei Bai looked at him for a while, then suddenly turned her head away and said coldly, No need, how long do you want to torture me for? Zero slowly reached out and pinched her face, so that she could not escape. He was clearly smiling, but there was no gentleness in his words. Don't ignore me in the future, don't ignore me, or I'll get angry. By Wei Wei. At the /crossover system, Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www.sashu. Download fast. Read the full text. 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 Fast, comma. Chapter 22:19. These words were actually a bit childish. But the man in front of her was abnormally calm, as if these words were very normal. She lowered her eyes and didn't look at him, but her pale fingers were grabbing the carpet and her body was slightly trembling. Zero lowered his head to look at her and the tiredness in his eyes appeared again. His fingers ran through her long hair and along the strands, he touched her neck. It was gentle and dark. Then he laid down beside her. His golden hair was entwined with hers and it was so beautiful that it made people hold their breaths. Wei Wei Bai's body was stiff and she didn't look at him at all. Zero's expression was still calm, but his fingers grabbed her waist and pulled her into his embrace. His fingertips gently came to the side of her face. When he gently touched it, it was as if he was touching some fragile flower petals. Some of the vines and flowers bloomed and there was a sweet scent in the air. Zero's aura was like these flowers, with a kind of fickle fragrance. Wei Wei, you created me. His tone was light and pious. Wei Wei Bai said in a cold and cruel voice, so this is how you treat your creator. I would rather not have created you. Zero's fingers slightly paused and his tone became gentle, but I am so glad that you are my creator. If someone else had created me, they would have been destroyed by me. It wasn't someone who came to be his chick complex. He would admit to it. Everything seemed to be just right. When he saw her, no matter how calm his heart was, it would also cause ripples to appear. Until now, it had already turned into a surging wave. It drowned out all possibilities for him to escape. Zero gently leaned against her and looked at the side of her face. His tone was gentle and tender. It was you who made me fall in love with you. Whether it was intentional or not, this was your mistake. Then you didn't dare to admit your mistake and even wanted to kill me to avoid your responsibility. Wei Wei Bai frowned and interrupted him sternly, I didn't really want to kill you. I just wanted you to completely lose your power. That way, everyone's eyes will focus on me again, and you won't steal everything away. When the system heard the host's words, it couldn't help but say, wow, don't dig up the wound. Hurry up and pretend to be a little innocent flower. Just say that you were blinded and accidentally stabbed him. You won't lose out if you admit your mistake. What kind of situation was this? Why did he insist on being the god of the end of the century? Wasn't this the same as stabbing a knife into the male lead's heart? Wei Wei Bai's face was full of tears. I stabbed him so ruthlessly and said such ruthless words. Now you're saying that you didn't do it on purpose. Who are you trying to fool? She also wanted to be a little white flower. But he couldn't change his character every day. She was not Zero. Her body was squeezed with several personalities. If she didn't say harsh words now, Ling might think that she had ulterior motives and wanted to deceive him. Therefore, even if he didn't say anything ruthless, he would still die. He might as well say some harsh words and have some fun. The system was silent for a while. Let me tell you some good news. Wei Wei Bai asked, is the supermarket going to refund my money? The system said. No, it's that the male lead's favorability is 95. Wei Wei Bai, what kind of shocking good news was this? It had inexplicably increased to 95. She had only stabbed him once, but he had done that to her. How did the favorability soar so high? The system said, because after the personality fusion, the host will bear the additional favorability of all the personalities. I didn't think that the total favorability of all 4 personalities would increase to 95. The Chapter 22-20. This was also why the main storyline mission only required 70 points of favorability. Because in the end, it would add up to almost 100 favorability points. Wei Wei Bai, who had a phobia of increasing favorability points, thought, although it's good news, it's still unsettling to see the favorability points increase so quickly. The system said, there's more bad news. Wei Wei Bai said. I don't want to hear it. The system said, congratulations, you're pregnant. Wei Wei Bai, the system said, I told you, you'll get pregnant if you do it again. Wei Wei Bai held her head in despair, feeling like 1,000 groundhogs were screaming in her head. She thought of the beastly coercion in the yellow sand. At that time, she had actually forgotten that something could get pregnant. She even refused to buy substitute stickers. At this moment, she finally knew what stinginess meant. She had brought this upon herself. This time, it wasn't an airball. It was a real child. Did the system see that she didn't have enough men, so it wanted her to start having children? She had a baby, and once the mission was completed, she had to leave. She felt horrified just thinking about it. Her baby was in a certain time and space, making scarecrows with her target, cursing her to die a horrible death. There was no way she could continue this mission. She wanted to go on strike. The system saw that the host was about to break down, and it understood how she felt. It comforted her, you didn't do it on purpose, you were forced. If this happened in reality, the police would be able to arrest the criminal beside you. Let's abort the child, it's a criminal's child. Wei Wei Bai, she thought that she was bad enough, but the system was even more heartless than her. She thought that she couldn't raise the baby, and that the baby would hate her. In the end, the system's solution was to just strangle the baby in her stomach, and then there would be no problem raising it. The system said, seeing you in so much pain, I'll tell you some good news to cheer you up. Wei Wei Bai asked, are you constipated? The words came out one by one. The system said, the male lead's power has eaten away the rule power of the main system, but it hasn't been done yet. Because his power is unstable when he does it with you, the child will only squeeze out the air ball after a month. Wei Wei Bai caught the main point. So, you can just abort the child within a month. That was not her child. It was just an empty balloon. This was because Zero's power would not invade her body within this month. Therefore, the embryo did not germinate. The system said, you can abort the child within a month. Wei Wei Bai. Do you want some medicine? The system said, it's no use. The male lead's ability is very strong. Even if you use drugs, you can only get rid of the empty balloon. Once the balloon is gone, the real embryo will develop. Therefore, once the medicine was used, she was really pregnant. Wei Wei Bai was still nagging the system on how to prevent herself from getting pregnant. However, the man behind her had already propped himself up and was almost covering her body. A shadow shrouded his face. In the half-light and half-shadow, there was an incomprehensible emotion surging in his golden eyes. It was both hot and cold. Being single-minded was a struggle. His lips slowly curled up. Why are you so determined to be a god? You're not capable enough. Wei Wei Bai's eyelashes fluttered. There was a flash of embarrassment in her eyes. Before you appeared, I was the strongest in the base. After you appeared, I started to be jealous of you. Her eyes were red as she said this. It seemed like she was angry, but it was more like she was vulnerable. 0 to coldness. Jealousy is the most useless emotion. Wei Wei Bai was anxious and asked coldly, have you never been jealous? Chapter 22-21. Zero's delicate and flawless face froze for a moment. Then he nodded slowly, his cold voice carrying a trace of dark evil. Yes, I am jealous that you set your eyes on anyone and anything other than me. Including this world that makes you want to become a god. Wei Wei Bai looked at him as if he was teasing her. Then she got up angrily and pushed him away. If you have time to talk nonsense like this, why don't we end this? Zero did not struggle. Instead, he looked innocent and calm. He supported himself on the carpet and looked at her indifferently. It was as if he was looking at an insensible child. The embarrassment in Wei Wei Bai's eyes were clearly seen by his cold and calm eyes. He even saw despair and desolation in her eyes. His existence was like a reminder of her failure. After Zero's fusion, the mature body would have a period of fatigue. All kinds of intense emotions or reactions would be suppressed. This would ensure that he could rest after fusion to the greatest extent. But even during such a stressful and tiring period, seeing her so sad, his heart was still throbbing with pain. After the fragments of memories of the four personalities merged, it was like a huge sharp blade. It completely pierced through his original personality. The good feelings and love that the main personality could suppress exploded all of a sudden. All those repressed feelings quickly broke through the hard shell of his heart and unscrupulously took over everything in him. If it wasn't for the period of fatigue, his love for her, it would be even crazier. After Wei Wei Bai looked at him in annoyance, she turned around and was about to leave when a hand gently grabbed her loose pants. If Wei Wei Bai didn't stop in time, her pants were pulled down by him. Wei Wei Bai resisted the urge to pull down her pants and said to the system, "Is Zero angry? I have enough hatred, right?" The system was confused. "Why do you have hatred?" "Wei Wei Bai, to make him so angry that he kicked me into the wall. This way, without the use of drugs, not to mention the air ball, even the baby that hasn't grown out yet will be gone." System, how great was this hatred? He thought that it was already very inhumane to get rid of the child, but he didn't expect that the child's father would get rid of the child. The host still had the nerve to look down on his character. Before Wei Wei Bai could hear the system's reply, Zero's fingers had already moved up and grabbed her calf. He rubbed his fingertips together, and there was a kind of possessive stickiness in the calm. She frowned. Just as she was about to lift her foot, she was worried that Ling would not let go. His pants were really pulled down. That scene would definitely be very ugly, and she would be done for no matter how hard she tried to act cool. So Wei Wei Bai stiffened and said coldly, "Let go." Zero did not say anything. Instead, he maintained his posture in silence. Wei Wei Bai turned around angrily and was about to say something. However, he saw Zero tilting her head up slightly. Her beautiful eyes were filled with bottomless longing. His long hair fell to the ground, and his golden eyes were gentle. Because his head was raised, his fragile and elegant neck was exposed. This posture was unexpectedly submissive. Zero's voice was hoarse as he said softly, "Why did you give up on me? You don't have to treat me as your enemy, your opponent, or even as a human." Wei Wei Bai's eyes were filled with shock. She had no idea why he would say something like that. It was so humble that it was shocking. The tiredness in Zero's eyes was even more obvious after his personality had matured. Save button. Chapter 22. His body was filled with greed for her, affection, joy, sadness, protection, possession. There was also paranoid madness. In the yellow sand that filled the sky, when his various personalities began to merge, he even had a terrible impulse to look at her face full of broken tiredness and disgust. He wanted to completely merge her into his body. Never be separated. This was an idea that was even more terrifying than the hungry personality eating her. He didn't even want to let go of her soul. From that moment on, he knew that he was twisted. His existence was only for her. This fate might have started when she was the first to walk into the blank space of his consciousness. At that time, she was branded in his subconscious. They couldn't be separated. Creeped out by his gaze, Wei Wei Bai's eyes flashed with a trace of wavering anxiety. I never thought of you as a human. You are a monster that I created. Zero saw the wavering and hesitation in her eyes. She didn't seem to believe in his feelings and was afraid that he would lie to her. That was why she wanted to destroy him. He still had the same sentimental and innocent posture, gently pressing his face against her leg. This posture of hugging her leg was done by a good-looking person. It was simply beautiful and seductive to the extreme. His voice was unusually soft, calm and bewitching, contradictory and strangely beautiful. Yes, I was created by you, so you never have to be afraid that I will betray you. She lowered her head to look at him, the anxiety on her face more obvious. She seemed to want to believe it, but in the end, she didn't dare to believe it. She forced herself to hold on, the corners of her mouth raised into a cold smile. Your not betrayal is to lock me up. Zero was silent for a while, then smiled and said matter-of-factly, I won't betray you, but I also want you to not betray me. Her betrayal was to escape from him. Wei Wei Bai looked at him coldly and suddenly wanted to kick him away. But she couldn't raise her leg. The cold vines began to spread, wrapping around her ankle. Zero looked at her indifferently. His posture was fragile just now, but now it was calm and cruel. A mature personality, with the memories of all the personalities, eroded the real main body. His emotions were unusually unstable. Never push me away, I don't like it. Wei Wei Bai felt that all this was ridiculous. She reached out and grabbed his hair. She lowered her head and looked at him coldly. Is it fun to take revenge on me like this? I want to kill you, so you thought of a new way to torture me and make me wish I was dead. The confusion and panic in her eyes were so obvious. She could not comprehend his terrible paranoia. Zero's long, butterfly-like eyelashes trembled slightly. Then, he slowly stared at her. Her bone-piercing gaze was indifferent, cold, heartless, proud and pure. It caused people to tremble incessantly. But gradually, his eyes were filled with a dark, abyss-like emotion. His violent emotions had destroyed all of his calm arrogance. He reached out his hands and forcefully and gently grasped her fingers that were tugging at his hair. Then, he pressed his face against her palm. Like a fragile child, they needed to be comforted by their loved ones. His lashes swept over her trembling palm. If you want to be a god, then I will conquer this world and make everyone in this world crawl under my feet. I will become everyone's god. Wei Wei Bai's face was a little pale. She thought that he was announcing her failure. But in the next second, he pressed his lips against her palm. His magnetic and cold voice was paranoid and affectionate. As for you, you will become a god to me alone. I will conquer the world and become a god. And you will be my god. Slash. Chapter 22-23. You can search Transmigration System, Prince Charming, come to search book, www.sashu.com, in Baidu to find the S. Become a god, a crazy god. Wei Wei Bai ate while looking at Zero torturing the plants and animals outside, including humans. After all, to become a god, one must beat others until they were convinced. The confinement vine was very powerful, and her superpower was useless. It was not the child's problem, but the fact that Zero had locked down the space energy, which meant that all her powers were tied up. Her only pleasure now was eating, playing with blocks, and reading. She would chat with the system about how to get rid of the child within a month. She would also check on what Zero was doing through the system. After a few times, she felt that she should not look. She was a brave person, but she looked at what Zero was doing. She was terrified. He was really going to become a god, and he had unified all the bases outside. He had opened up new lands, captured monsters, and studied life force. Everyone who saw him would kneel and kowtow all the way. Those who did not obey him were all dead. Those who did not obey him were all hiding underground. Even so, they were still found by Zero. After the personality fusion, Zero had second baby's bewitching methods, eldest baby's absolute intelligence, and third baby's cruelty. Fourth baby's fourth baby's life skills. Bai Weiwei expressionlessly picked up the milk and slowly drank it. There were familiar wild fruits in the milk, and Zero knew that she was pregnant. This was a fucked up plane. Did she come to this plane to be a crazy, irresponsible mother who thought about how to get rid of the child every day? The system said, "You're going to give birth in half a month. You're going to have it." Weiwei Bai said, "I don't have the ability now. I can't go out, I can't fight, and I can't even harm myself." There were some transparent threads on her fingers and legs. They could only be barely seen under the light. These were air threads, and when not in use, they did not hinder people at all. After all, no one had ever heard of walking around in the air and feeling that it was difficult to move. It was scary whenever she wanted to go on a hunger strike, harm herself, or make a scene by biting her tongue. These threads would become terrifying puppet threads that would control her and prevent her from harming herself, allowing her to eat as usual. Even if she didn't sleep, she would still be manipulated to sleep on the bed. If she couldn't fall asleep, he would gently use medication to force her to sleep. Weiwei Bai expressed that she finally understood what it felt like to be a puppet. It was too scary. How did this ability evolve? The strings of the puppet completely cut off the possibility of her doing whatever she wanted. Weiwei Bai said to the system, "Ever since the fusion of the two personalities, it's like the combination of a sickly and blackened person." While holding her thighs, he begged her not to leave. At the same time, he coldly gave her a bunch of puppet strings just because she was hungry. What a freak. The system replied, "It's okay, you're used to it." Weiwei Bai, listen, is this what the system is saying? Is there still true love in this world? After she finished the milk, she quietly opened the book and continued to read. The current Zero wasn't easy to fool, so when he couldn't find any breakthrough points, she wouldn't mess around. The dagger still had a little power left, so it probably wouldn't be useful to Zero. But when she remembered that it was 580, she felt that it would be good to keep it as a souvenir. She bought the most expensive and the most useless thing. Halfway through the book, the door that couldn't be opened. A powerful and cold figure slowly appeared under the shroud of the light. Weiwei Bai looked up and saw Zero in a black robe. The robe fell to his ankles, casting a beautiful shadow. Download the at https://m Sashu. Com the. Chapter 22-24. He was like a golden deity, his expression indifferent and lifeless. But when his gaze landed on her body, ripples appeared in his golden eyes and they softened. "Weiwei, I'm back." His voice merged with the sound of the door closing as he walked in. It gave off a dark and domineering aura. Weiwei Bai did not say anything, nor did she greet him. She even ignored him. The thin strings of air could only control her movements, but not her voice. Hence, if Zero wanted to hear a warm welcome, it was impossible. Zero slowly lowered his body. She was sitting on the carpet, leaning against the cushion. However, he lay down and gently rested his head on her lap. His beautiful golden eyes narrowed in satisfaction. At this moment, he was more like a child who had just returned from a long day of running around. The urge to act spoiled was very strong. Zero murmured, "Weiwei, I've taken down a few more bases for you. The integration of the Doomsday bases is almost complete. He wanted to be everyone's leader, everyone's god, and king. First, he had to have a decent land. The land of the doomsday bases were those bases. And the people in the bases. And to Zero, those people were their future subjects. Wei Wei Bai was calm and had no intention of talking to him. Ever since Zero started to wrap the puppet strings around her body, she had been in a cold war with him. They had been in a cold war for more than a week. Zero did not care as long as she was around and did not run away. Eating well and sleeping well was enough. He slowly closed his eyes as if he was tired. Not long after, the sound of peaceful breathing could be heard. Wei Wei Bai asked, "Is he really asleep?" The system replied, "He's asleep, but as long as you move, he'll definitely wake up." Zero's reflexes were not something a human could have. Wei Wei Bai said, "So secretive. Am I really going to be a scumbag mother?" The system said, "It's rare to have the experience of being a mother. Why don't you try?" Wei Wei Bai said, "After I try, can I still stuff it back in if I regret it?" The system was speechless. The image was too strong, and he couldn't bear to look at it directly. Wei Wei Bai said, "Forget it, I'll find my own entertainment. I'm going to become a monkey in the zoo if I'm locked up every day." After saying that, he looked at Zero, who was sleeping soundly. He slowly reached out his hand to touch the necklace on his neck. The necklace was a key. The key that unlocks the door that holds her captive. She carefully unlocked the key and held it in her hand. Zero was still in a deep sleep, as if he was exhausted from the outside world. However, the imprisoning vines didn't move either. She gently moved aside and gave him the cushion to use as a pillow. Then, she tiptoed to the door. He inserted the key into the keyhole, and with a click, the door opened. Wei Wei Bai was overjoyed. She pushed open the door and was about to step out. However, he suddenly froze. What was outside the door was not yellow sand, nor was it the base. Instead, it was an unfamiliar garden. A transparent protective shield enveloped the entire place. In front of the door, there were ancient roses. It was almost like a flower field, full of brilliant flowers. It was simply stunning and extravagant. She stood at the door, the sunlight shining on her body. Her eyes were clear and filled with surprise. When she realized that she was about to escape, a pair of hands had already reached out from behind and gently hugged her. The man behind her pressed his body against hers. His gentle chest pressed against her thin back. "Do you like it?" He had just woken up, and his voice was hoarse from sleepiness. It was so sexy that it numbed her. Wei Wei Bai was silent for a long time. Suddenly, she threw the key in her hand into the flower field. Then, she pushed Zero away and walked through the door again. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.